Chapter 564. The judges hadn't even started commenting yet, but the onlookers were already in an uproar because of the way Amy ate the kebabs. If there was one thing that represented cuteness, then Amy was the only one that came to mind right now. Moreover, the fragrant kebabs were incomparably delicious in her mouth. Her sweet and adorable smile coupled with her blissful eating posture made it seem like nothing could be more blissful than eating the kebabs in her hands. This should be the new dish that Mr. Mac is preparing after coming back from his trip to collect ingredients, right? As expected, Mr. Mac always brings us surprises every time he goes out to collect ingredients. I must be the first to taste this delicious kebabs tomorrow. I wonder if Mr. Mac will open for business tonight. After watching the little boss eat the kebabs, I don't think I can make it through this long night. That's impossible. Mr. Mac is a very principled person. If he says he'll take a day off, then he'll take a day off. You don't have to think about it tonight. All of Mamie Restaurant's regulars were completely at ease now, and were in a very good mood. Most of them were looking forward to seeing when this new dish would appear on Mamie Restaurant's menu, and their anticipation had been raised to an extreme. As for those who had heard of Amy's for the first time, they were also starting to have some interest in the restaurant. The little girl was really enjoying her food. However, they still wanted to hear the judges' comments and see who would emerge victorious in today's competition. 5 plates of kebabs were placed in front of the 5 judges. Yabamiya returned to Meg's side, and Meg whispered a few words into her ear. Yabamiya was slightly taken aback, but she quickly nodded and turned to walk into the restaurant. Meanwhile, Meg was appraising the judges with a smile, silently waiting for their comments and choices. He was still feeling a little strange. After all, this was the first time that he had placed his cooking on a table for professionals to evaluate, and 2 of them were from the same industry as him. Ricky's expression was also quite grave. His hands were tightly clenched behind his back, and cold sweat was slowly flowing down his forehead. If he had known that Meg was this good at roast meat, then he definitely wouldn't have challenged him. Even if it was just to garner popularity for Ricky's rotisserie, he would have at least removed the last 2 conditions. If he were to lose the recipe and the restaurant, then he would have lost everything. Currently, a plate of roast lamb and a plate of freshly pulled kebabs were placed in front of the 5 judges. 3 of the judges had already tasted the roast lamb and gave it good reviews, but Mr. Hill and Mr. Robert had yet to taste it. Mr. Robert sliced off a piece of lamb rib and a piece of lamb leg, and he nodded as he said, "This roast lamb rib is crispy and fragrant, and the sauce and condiments are just right. The control of the heat is perfect, and this is one of the best roast lamb ribs ever. The roast lamb leg is tender and juicy, and it has a very smooth texture, bringing out the delicious flavor of the lamb to perfection. In a whole roasted lamb, roasting different parts of the lamb to the best degree of heat and taste, this whole roasted lamb is undoubtedly very successful." Mr. Hill took a glance at Mr. Robert, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he picked up his fork again and placed a piece of lamb leg into his mouth. After chewing for a while, a faint smile appeared on his face, and he nodded as he said, "This roast lamb leg really is quite good. The skin is charred and the meat is tender, and it's even more delicious than Cardis roast lamb. Of course, their master's dish is the roast suckling pig." Ricky and his employees' expressions eased slightly upon hearing this. At the very least, they had received good reviews from the 5 judges. However, none of the judges had tasted Meg's kebabs yet, so they didn't know how they would fare. "Let me try this roast beef skewered on bamboo skewers first." Mr. Febid was just about to cut into the kebabs when he caught sight of Amy, who was happily munching on a kebab with one hand. He hesitated momentarily before setting down his knife and fork, and he picked up a kebab instead. The aroma of roast meat wafted toward him, and the translucent fatty meat was embedded into the beef like a series of small crystals. The sauce had been applied in an extremely smooth and even manner, and the surface of the roast meat had a faint sheen of oil, giving it a very delicate appearance. However, the 3 pieces of beef were slightly different in color, and Mr. Febid was rather perplexed by this. He didn't know whether it was a mistake in applying the sauce, or a lack of control over the heat. On the surface, this was clearly a negative factor. To be able to roast 3 pieces of beef of different colors on the same kebab, it would be a pity not to dye them. Mr. Febid pursed his lips as he looked up at Meg. Even though the kebabs smelled very good, he couldn't pass up on an opportunity to use his venomous tongue. He had to maintain his own style, and he couldn't afford to ruin his image. Febid's words also caused a burst of laughter. People who liked to read Febid's food reviews didn't want to get any recommendations from him. More often than not, they wanted to see him use sharp and vicious words to review restaurants and food. His witty words often made people smile. Controlling the heat is the most basic ability of roast meat. Ricky looked at the different kebabs in Mr. Febid's hands, and a hint of mockery appeared on his face. No matter how fragrant the kebabs were, if they couldn't even control the heat properly, then Meg's roast meat would only be a failure. Everyone's expressions became even more expectant upon hearing this. The color wasn't important. The most important thing was whether or not the kebabs tasted good. Now, the outcome of the kebabs had become something that everyone was looking forward to. Meg smiled, but didn't say anything. The reason why the kebabs were of different colors wasn't because of the heat, but the food would speak for itself, so he didn't bother to explain. Mr. Febid was already prepared to retaliate, and he was rather disappointed to see Meg remain silent. The aroma of the kebabs in his hands wafted into his nostrils, and the most prominent one was the aroma of garlic. He had never seen anyone add garlic as a condiment to roast beef, and he couldn't imagine what the combination of the two flavors would be like. As a result, his anticipation for the kebabs plummeted even further, and he was no longer as excited as he had been when he first smelled the kebabs. Let's at least give it a try. Hopefully, he won't ruin such a supreme-grade piece of ironhide bull meat, Mr. Febid thought to himself before taking a bite of the topmost piece of beef. This flavor, it's incredible. Mr. Febid's expression immediately lit up. As soon as the beef entered his mouth, the slightly charred skin and the garlic-scented sauce melted in his mouth. The aroma of garlic, which was normally quite pungent, was now extremely gentle and delicious, and he couldn't help but salivate. Then, he chewed it carefully. The fresh and tender beef melted in his mouth, and the aroma of garlic and meat spread out from the meat. The delicious taste bloomed in his mouth instantly. With every bite, he could feel his taste buds cheering, making it impossible for him to stop. Chapter 565. I can't believe Febid used the word delicious to describe this beef kebab. This is incredible to him, who normally only uses not bad to describe his favorite food. Most importantly, aren't the two beef kebabs of different flavors? It's already very impressive to be able to create one type of delicious roast beef, but this restaurant owner created two types of delicious roast beef in the same kebab. This is incredible. There are 3 types of beef kebabs. Have you forgotten that all 3 of them are of different colors? It's clearly not because they're undercooked. It's because the 3 kebabs have completely different flavors. Febid's words created a stir among the crowd, and everyone wore astonished expressions, as well as a hint of excitement. It shouldn't disappoint me, right? Hill looked at the intricate roast beef kebab in front of her before slicing off half a piece of beef with a knife. Juices flowed out of the incision, and she could feel the softness of the meat beneath the knife, but it didn't stick to the knife in the slightest. The delectable aroma of meat wafted forth, and her eyes immediately lit up. In her eyes, ironhide bulls were only ordinary ingredients, and higher-level magic beasts were nothing more than 3 meals a day for her. However, this small piece of beef had given her such a strong reaction to food for the first time. There seemed to be a voice in her head that was yelling in a frenzy, "Eat it! Eat it!" Hill picked up a piece of beef with her fork before gracefully placing it into her seductive mouth. Her elegant brows immediately perked up, and her expression also lit up. The delicious sauce on the surface of the beef and the juices flowing out of the incision instantly awakened her taste buds. She chewed lightly, and the juices and condiments in her mouth created an incredible combination of deliciousness. It was as if a thunderbolt fireball had exploded in her mouth before transforming into countless thunderbolt fireballs. The more Hill chewed, the more the aroma exploded. She couldn't help but chew faster and faster. Then, it became an interesting cycle that she couldn't stop. Even when she swallowed the meat into her stomach, the unforgettable aroma still lingered between her lips and teeth. Hill didn't say anything. Instead, She reached out and grabbed the kebab on the plate. She took a bite of the remaining half of the kebab, closed her eyes, and chewed carefully. A blissful and satisfied smile appeared on her face, and it was as if all of her ladle-like demeanor was no longer worth maintaining in the face of such delicious food. What an incredible taste! This is the most delicious food I've ever eaten. Even the roast pig from Karpa's restaurant isn't half as delicious as this. After finishing a piece of beef, Hill exclaimed in admiration. He raised his hand and took another bite. This time, the taste of garlic was gone. Instead, it was replaced by a mellow taste of sauce. The taste was slightly heavier. After swallowing, the rich aroma still lingered in his mouth. Then, it attacked the third piece of beef. Miss Hill actually gave such a high evaluation. Earlier, I said that Ricky's roast lamb is better than Dukas Restaurant's roast lamb, but that's just an ordinary dish from Dukas Restaurant. Roast suckling pig is Dukas Restaurant's signature dish, and it's ranked first on the gourmet cuisine rankings. Gulp, I can't take this anymore. I'm starving to death. Why am I being tortured here when I haven't eaten anything yet? It's over. All 5 of the judges are completely immersed in the kebab. Ricky's roast meat is going to go cold. Another uproar immediately ensued after Miss Hill's evaluation. Her evaluation had completely exceeded everyone's expectations. Dukas Restaurant's roast pig was extremely renowned, and one had to make a reservation 15 days in advance before being able to eat it. Furthermore, the price was exorbitant, and it was not something that the average person could afford. However, the roast pig was the epitome of all high-end restaurants in the Aden Square, yet it had now become nothing more than a foil to Ricky's roast beef kebab. Furthermore, Miss Hill of the Buffett family had just given her evaluation. Ricky's face had paled slightly, and his hands were trembling slightly behind his back as he forced himself to remain calm. Meanwhile, the employees of Ricky's rotisserie were already in a state of complete panic. They clenched their fists nervously with dejected expressions on their faces. They could already sense that a shadow was slowly descending upon them, but there was no way for them to escape from this shadow. Robert had already taken a bite of his third beef kebab, and as soon as it entered his mouth, a hint of elation appeared on his face. The invasively spicy flavor was like a series of tiny fireballs exploding on his taste buds. It was as if a bucket of oil had been poured over a scorching fire, instantly igniting his taste buds. After tasting the delicious garlic and sauce-flavored roast beef, Robert actually wasn't looking forward to the third beef kebab. After all, no matter how delicious a dish was, it would lose its allure after tasting it 3 times. However, this beef kebab had completely upended his expectations. The invigorating spiciness was only the beginning. After igniting his taste buds, the aroma hidden behind the spicy flavor began to reveal its unique allure. In contrast to the unbearable spiciness of normal chili peppers, the spiciness contained within this beef kebab wasn't unbearable. Instead, what was even more pronounced was the aroma that began to emerge from the beef kebab. His taste buds had already been stimulated by the first 2 beef kebab, and in that instant, the aroma was brought to a peak. The scorching spiciness flowed down his throat, and his entire stomach seemed to have warmed up. It was so comfortable that he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. These 3 beef kebab have brought me 3 types of pleasant surprises. The garlic-flavored beef is delicious and refreshing. The sauce-flavored beef is rich and fragrant, and the spicy-flavored beef is extremely spicy. Each of the 3 kebab flavors is very unique. They're all roast beef kebab, but they're all completely different experiences, and each of them is an extreme culinary experience. Robert put down the skewer in his hand and sighed with emotion. His gaze fell upon Meg, and there was a hint of gratification and admiration in his eyes. A person like him could only be described as a genius. He'd created a completely revolutionary roast beef kebab, yet he'd presented an impeccable answer sheet. Furthermore, the order in which he'd chosen the 3 kebab was also a display of his wisdom. If he'd placed the spicy kebab first, then the other 2 kebab flavors would have definitely been overshadowed. Phew! The other 4 judges put down the skewers in their hands almost in unison, and all of them heaved sighs of contentment. Hill stuck out her tongue in an adorable manner, and it was quite rare for her to be so adorable. However, She quickly covered her mouth with her hand. I don't even know what words I can use to describe this delicacy. I've never been touched by this delicious kebab before in my life. Once I get home and calm down, I'll be sure to reflect on this feeling and share it with everyone, the professor said with a slightly wistful sigh. I'm ashamed of myself, Charles said with a hint of defeat on his face. The entire venue fell completely silent. There seemed to be no suspense in the outcome, but everyone still wanted to hear the final result from the judges. Chapter 566. Everyone was staring at the 5 judges with wide eyes, waiting for them to announce the final result. Ricky's breathing began to accelerate. He could already tell from the 5 judges' comments that they were biased toward, but he was still hoping for a miracle. He had spent 3 years researching and developing that sauce, and had experienced countless failures, all for the sake of improving the flavor of Ricky's roast meat. How much courage and wisdom was required to accomplish such a feat? He couldn't lose. That was a business that had been run by 3 generations of the Barkley family. If he were to lose, then he would have no face left to continue living. Amy was elated as she prepared her second kebab, and she wasn't worried about the outcome of the competition in the slightest. After all, in her eyes, no one could be more powerful than her father, so she was sure that he would win this competition. I choose the roast beef kebab made by the owner of Amy's. Hill wiped the corners of her mouth gracefully with a silk handkerchief before turning to Meg with a smile. The beef is very delicious. If there's a chance, I'd like to invite you to the Buffett Manor to cook another delicious roast beef kebab for me. Thank you for your invitation, Miss Hill. It would be an honor for me to be able to visit the Buffett Manor, but if you'd like to try my roast beef kebab, then I'd like to invite Ms. Hill to my restaurant for a taste. Meg turned down Hill's invitation with a smile. Meg wasn't someone who would do things like providing on-site service. Even if Hill were to offer him a high price, he still wouldn't agree. On top of that, he had a big business deal that he wanted to discuss with her. If he were to roast beef kebab for her, then he would appear to be in a disadvantageous position, and that was a huge taboo in business negotiations. Hill looked at Meg with a hint of surprise in her eyes. This was the first time that a chef had turned down her invitation. If all of the chefs who wanted to work at the Buffett Manor were to find out about this, they would most likely beat their chests in frustration. What an interesting guy. She nodded and said, All right, looks like Mr. Meg is someone who can distinguish between work and personal life very well. If you have some time on your day off this week, perhaps you could bring your adorable daughter to the Buffett Manor for a visit. My pleasure. Meg nodded slightly, but he didn't show too much surprise. It was as if he had just accepted an invitation from an ordinary friend. He had been to many rich manors in his previous life. If he really wanted to count, his house could be considered as one as well, so he didn't feel that this was something to be happy about. Everyone looked at Meg enviously. If the Hills' initial invitation was to invite Meg to the manor to cook for her alone, and after being rejected by Meg without hesitation, her second invitation was as if she was inviting him as an equal friend. To be treated like this by the young leader of the Buffett family, Meg really was quite impressive. The Buffett Manor wasn't a place that just anyone could enter and leave. As one of the wealthiest families on the entire Norland continent, even the slightest bit of money that slipped through their fingers was enough to drive anyone crazy. Ricky's face turned a shade paler, and he resisted the urge to speak. Is there any suspense to this question? This roast beef kebab has completely overturned all of my expectations of roast meat. Such delicious roast meat has never appeared on the Norland continent, and it most likely won't appear in the future, either. As such, I choose the roast beef kebab. Febid spoke in a loud voice, and a complex expression appeared on his face. He had completely overturned all of his expectations today, but even as picky as he was, he really couldn't find any fault with such a perfect roast beef kebab. If he really wanted to find fault with it, then the only thing he could think of was that there were only 3 cubes of beef on the kebab. There simply wasn't enough. Ricky's expression changed again, and he turned to the remaining 3 judges with a pale face. The employees of Ricky's rotisserie were also in a complete panic. Was the worst thing that they wanted to happen going to happen? What were they supposed to do now? All of the spectators were also looking at the remaining 3 judges. As long as one of them voted for Meg, then Meg would win this contest. Flavor, texture, heat control, Mr. Mac's roast beef kebab is superior in all aspects. It's both delicious and innovative, so I choose the roast beef kebab. Robert turned to Ricky with a forlorn expression. If it weren't for the fact that Ricky's rotisserie had rigged the votes on the Aiden Square Food Competition rankings, his roast lamb would have made it into the top 30 for sure. Boss Ricky's roast lamb has indeed improved significantly, but Boss Meg's roast beef is undoubtedly perfect, so I choose the roast beef kebab. The professor pointed at Meg with a forlorn expression. I choose the roast beef kebab. Charles heaved a forlorn sigh as he turned to Ricky, and a sense of empathy welled up in his heart. If Dukas Restaurant's roast pig was an insurmountable peak for all of the rotisserie restaurants in the Aiden Square, then Mamie's roast beef kebab would most likely surpass Dukas Restaurant's roast beef kebab, and all of the rotisserie restaurants in the Aiden Square had lost their motivation to catch up. Mamie's has won with a unanimous vote. Someone in the silent crowd exclaimed, and a massive commotion instantly ensued. Even though this result was within everyone's expectations, they were still very excited to see Meg's roast beef kebab in front of them. They had thought that Ricky would be able to crush Meg in a landslide victory, but Meg had turned the tables on Ricky with a perfect roast beef kebab and received a unanimous vote. Thank you. Meg nodded with a smile. The result was within his expectations, but he was still quite happy to receive a unanimous vote and an extremely high evaluation. Hitch. Impossible. Ricky's rotund body swayed unsteadily, and he looked as if he were about to fall to the ground at any moment. His face had turned as pale as a sheet of paper. None of the 5 judges supported him, and if he lost like this, then his rotisserie would no longer belong to him. Now that the 5 judges have made their decisions, I win. Meg looked at Ricky with a calm expression, and there was no hint of elation on his face. No, I refuse to believe that this is the result. These people must have been hired by you. Ricky shook his head before rushing over to the judge's table. He grabbed the untouched roast beef kebab from Febid's plate before taking a bite out of it. This flavor. How is this possible? Ricky's eyes immediately widened as the delicious sauce and beef wreaked havoc in his mouth. The roast beef had been cooked with just the right amount of heat, and the roast beef had been cooked with just the right amount of heat. All of the energy in Ricky's body seemed to have been sucked out of him in that instant, and his legs gave out from under him as he sat down onto the ground with a forlorn expression on his face, as if he had lost his soul. Febid had already risen to his feet, and he quickly picked up the roast beef kebab that had slipped out of his hand. He looked at the missing piece of beef with a pained expression as he yelled, "Ricky, you've already lost. Why did you have to steal my kebab?" Chapter 567. How could this be? How could anyone in this world make such delicious roast meat? No, I can't lose. The Barkley family's rotisserie has been around for over 10 generations, ever since Rodu, and 3 generations in Chaos City. I can't let it fall into someone else's hands. Well, why am I so stupid? I've lost both the rotisserie and the recipe. My dad is going to be furious. I still want to show him that I'm in the top 20 on the chef's rankings board before he dies. Ricky collapsed onto the ground, and his clothes were completely drenched in cold sweat. Even the stone tiles on the ground were soaked, and his body was trembling as he cried, making him appear rather pitiful to the onlookers. The commotion in the crowd gradually subsided. Even though the match had already concluded, no one was in a hurry to leave. Meg and Ricky had placed a huge bet on this match, and everyone wanted to see how Meg was going to deal with the situation. Ricky was crying quite pitifully, but the regulars of Mamie's weren't concerned in the slightest. From morning until night, Ricky had been yelling at Mr. Mac for not daring to accept the challenge, and that he was the one who had proposed all of the conditions, so it was an extremely ugly sight to behold. Now that Mag had stepped in and won this battle where they had bet their dignity and all their assets, it could be said that Mag had helped them vent their anger. Of course, they weren't staying just to see Ricky's downfall. Most of them were here for the mutton kebabs on the table beside the rotisserie. They wondered if Mr. Mac would be in a good mood after accepting the challenge and cook some beef kebabs for everyone. Everyone was extremely tempted by the sight of Amy and the other judges eating the mutton kebabs. Meanwhile, Meg was looking at the message displayed in his mind, and a peculiar expression appeared on his face. The system had suddenly issued a new mission, and this mission was so embarrassing that he didn't know what to say. As such, he pursed his lips internally as he cursed, "System, this new mission of yours is toxic. Are you trying to draw hatred toward me? I still want to continue to develop in a wretched manner. Can't you just let me be a handsome man who cooks in peace?" Host, as a candidate for the god of cookery, you should challenge the world with your culinary skills and conquer the world with your delicious food. This system expresses serious disdain towards your idea of being content with seclusion, developing wretchedly, and becoming a Voldemort. Therefore, in order to speed up your culinary skills, this mission was selected. The system's solemn voice sounded, with a hint of unquestionable authority. "I'm a father now. As long as my baby is outstanding, it's fine. Why should I be so high profile? What if others think that I'm the main character?" Meg said indifferently. "This system is already very outstanding, and I've always known that I'm a main character, so you don't have to worry about this." The system snorted. Meg raised an eyebrow and said with a strange expression, "I'm talking about Amy. System, do you have to act so naturally?" Meg's mind was suddenly filled with chaotic noises, followed by a row of garbled codes. After a while, the system's voice sounded out, gnashing its teeth as it said, "Host, please complete the mission within 3 minutes. If you fail the mission, you will be punished by forfeiting 0.75 points of physical strength." Holy fuck, do you have to be so ruthless? Meg couldn't help but curse. If this were to happen, then all of his hard work today would have been for nothing. He tried asking, "Then what's the reward for this mission?" "1/2 of a point of physical strength," the system replied. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Meg's eyes lit up. With this 0.25 point of physical strength, he would receive 1 point of physical strength for the day. He didn't think that he would be able to rise up 2 levels in a row. The system was being so generous today that it didn't seem like a proper system at all. "The outcome of the duel has been determined, and I've won. The results were determined by the 5 judges, and everyone here can be witnesses. I'll send the agreement that we signed to the City Lord's Manor's notary office in a moment, and I'll ask the City Lord's Manor to assist with the handover of the restaurant. I hope that everything in the restaurant will be intact. As for the first 2 conditions, forget about it." Meg looked at Ricky with a calm expression. It was a basic trait of a businessman to not give up on profits for the sake of someone else's tears, especially when this was someone who had once tried to eat him alive. "Boss Meg, I'll kowtow to you and call you father. Please, please don't take my rotisserie away from me. I know I was wrong, and I won't do it again. I'll be your son from now on, and I'll do anything you ask of me. Please don't take away my rotisserie, I beg you." Ricky's entire body trembled as he knelt onto the ground. He sobbed as he reached out to hug Meg's leg. "I told you that I don't want Amy to have a strange little brother, so I won't agree to your request." Meg took a step back as a hint of disgust flashed through his eyes. He looked at Ricky with a cold expression and said, "I don't want your whole rotisserie lamb recipe. If you still have the basic dignity of a chef, then leave this place on your feet. No chef will starve to death in this world." Ricky's expression faltered upon hearing this. He looked up at Meg from his kneeling position, and something seemed to be gathering in his eyes. "Of course, even if you go back and cook a whole rotisserie lamb for another 100 years, it still won't taste as good as mine." Meg looked down at Ricky, then looked around at everyone present with a smile and said, "I'm here to correct the definition of food in this world. If you're not convinced, then you're welcome to battle me. However, make sure to bring something that can tempt me." Wow, Mr. Mac is so cool. He's a little arrogant, but why do I feel like he's so cool? This is a declaration of war against all chefs in the world. I feel like there will be more and more battles like this in the future. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Meg, and it was as if there was a brilliant light radiating from this man's body, making it difficult for everyone to look away. Correct the definition of food? What a grand dream. I hope you can really achieve it. A gratified smile appeared on Robert's face as he looked at Meg. A person like him isn't easy to control. However, the Buffett family specializes in cooperation. It's not easy to be a great person, and it's also not easy to be a great chef. The Buffett family loves to help those who are struggling. The Hill also had a smile on his face as he looked at Meg with approval in his eyes. He had earned a restaurant in such a short time. Not only was he a chef, but he was also a shrewd businessman. The light that had just appeared in Ricky's eyes was instantly snuffed out, and he was helped into a horse-drawn carriage by a few employees. He quickly disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a few employees who were waiting for the oven to cool down. They didn't know if there was a need to take the oven back. Following the conclusion of the duel, the judges couldn't help but pick up the remaining kebabs on their plates. How could they let such delicious food go to waste? Febid rolled his eyes at Ricky's carriage and grumbled to himself before continuing to eat the remaining 2 kebabs. Chapter 568. What's that? It looks like some kind of alcohol. It has the aroma of malt. Could it be malt wine? But how can malt wine be so clear and transparent? Everyone opened up a path and looked curiously at the tray in Yabamiya's hands. In the large crystal glass, the pale golden liquid took up about 2/3 of the volume. There was a layer of white foam floating on top of it, and there were a few ice cubes floating in the middle. The faint aroma of malt wine wafted out, and the eyes of the people standing close to it lit up. Unlike the bitter taste of ordinary malt wine, this aroma was very refreshing, like the smell of the summer sea breeze. We won. Meg looked at Yabamiya with a smile. Seeing the surprised smile on her face, he pointed in the direction of the judges and said, "Serve the beer to the judges." Okay. Yabamiya nodded happily, unable to hide the smile on her face. She was called by Meg to serve the so-called beer at the most critical moment, and she didn't expect to receive such good news as soon as she came out. Meg won, and Mamie's wouldn't become someone else's restaurant, and she could continue to work at the restaurant. Yabamiya placed the 5 glasses of beer in front of the 5 judges one by one, then took the tray and retreated to the side. The 5 judges had just finished their roast beef kebabs, and the spicy taste wreaked havoc in their mouths. They couldn't help but take deep breaths as they looked at the strange-colored beer in front of them, and couldn't help but look at Meg strangely. Meg took 2 steps forward and smiled at the 5 judges, saying, "This is beer with ice cubes, and it's also the restaurant's first beverage other than the roast beef kebabs. Since the judges have already eaten the roast beef kebabs, perhaps you can try this cold beer." Beer? What kind of beer is this? How come I've never heard of it? Yeah, adding ice cubes in beer will dilute the taste of the beer, right? People who know how to drink won't spoil good beer like this. After Mr. Mack corrected the definition of good food, is he going to correct the definition of good beer in this world? Isn't this a little too cruel? Everyone started to discuss among themselves as they looked curiously at the pale golden beer. The judges' gazes fell back on the beer in front of them. The round crystal glasses were clean and transparent. It was hard to imagine that someone would use such a delicate and transparent crystal to make beer glasses, and there were 5 of the same style at once. It was so extravagant that they were speechless. There isn't even a single pattern. It feels like a waste of a good crystal. Hill took a glance at the crystal glasses, and her gaze was quickly attracted by the beer in the glass. The pale golden beer was clear and transparent, and there were no floating particles. Aside from the aroma of malt, there was also a peculiar aroma wafting toward her nose. It was an elegant and shy aroma that wasn't pungent at all. Instead, it was faintly discernible. It wasn't the aroma of malt, nor was it the aroma of flowers. It wasn't invasive, but it entangled one's heart. It was as if you had discovered a kitten in the bushes by the roadside, and it was trembling as it poked its head out to meow at you. However, when you tried to hug it, it would burrow back into the bushes. When you tried to leave, it would do the same thing and meow again, as if it were playing hide and seek with you. This was the aroma that made you want to smile. Hill didn't like to drink. Even if she did, she would only drink the top-grade wine brewed by her own winery. The Roth Empire's royal family would order a batch of wine from the Buffett winery every year for the emperor to enjoy, so she naturally drank better wine than that batch. However, she was suddenly quite interested in this glass of beer, which seemed to be malt wine. She had never seen a wine with so many bubbles before. It was as if there were snow piled on top of the glass, and there were 3 ice cubes floating in the beer, creating a rather peculiar sight. After a moment of hesitation, Hill picked up the glass and took a sip. The clear, pale golden beer slid down her throat, and the refreshing and smooth texture made her eyes light up. It was refreshing, but not lacking in richness. It was as if ice water had melted from a 10,000-year-old snowy mountain, and it was as if it had transformed into a stream of white water that flowed down from the top of a 10,000-year-old snowy mountain. The refreshing coolness instantly extinguished the burning sensation in her throat that had been caused by the spicy beef. She almost thought she heard a light sizzling sound, and it was as if her soul had been lifted into the air. There was a hint of bitterness in the beer, but it was still very pleasant. After swallowing, there was no aftertaste. Instead, it made her want to take another big sip. Phew! Hill exhaled gently and stuck out her pink tongue to lick the white bubbles on her red lips. She carefully savored the faint aroma that lingered in her mouth. The alcohol wasn't overpowering, nor was it overly sweet. It gave her the impression that it was more delicious than the red wine that had been stored in the cellar of a winery for over 100 years. She raised the glass and took another big sip. A wisp of pale golden beer slowly slid down the corner of her lips and then slowly flowed down her proud neck. Countless men couldn't help but salivate at the sight of her slightly moving throat. Febid raised his glass and tilted his head back to gulp it down. The beer in the glass was decreasing at a rate that was visible to the naked eye. The large glass that could hold a liter of beer was emptied in a single gulp. The crystal glass was placed on the table, and only the 3 ice cubes at the bottom and the white bubbles hanging from the sides of the glass were left. Burp. Febid let loose a long burp, and he didn't notice that his perfectly trimmed mustache was stained with bubbles. He exclaimed in an elated manner, "This beer is so refreshing. It's like it was made for roast meat. It's cold and smooth, and it's slightly bitter, but not astringent. The alcohol is gentle and harmonious, and it's extremely potent. The spiciness of the kebabs has been completely dispelled in just one glass, and it makes me want to have another big glass and another handful of kebabs. This is indeed a very special wine. Even though it has the aroma of malt, it's not as bitter as normal wheat wines. The delicate bitterness makes the wine even more charming, and there's no aftertaste, so I can drink it continuously without stopping." The professor also quickly finished an entire glass of beer and praised with a sigh of admiration, "This is indeed a very good beer. I've never drunk before, but even I find it to be very refreshing and delicious. It's not as hard to swallow as normal wines, and after drinking it, I feel as if my entire body has been cleansed. It's very special." Robert nodded in agreement before taking another small sip from his glass. "Good beer. If you compare this with roast meat, it'll definitely be an extraordinary experience." Seal also nodded in agreement. He looked at Meg with a half-joking expression and asked, "I wonder if you're thinking of selling this beer, Boss Meg?" "I'm not thinking of doing that at the moment. The production of hand-brewed beer is most likely not enough for the customers of Amy's." Meg shook his head with a smile. With these judges' words, his worries about the beer being unable to acclimatize to the environment in this world had been completely dispelled. "I'm getting thirsty from watching this. Is this so-called beer really that good? Look, young Mistress Hill is still drinking it. The Buffett Winery is one of the top 10 wineries on the Norland continent. If even she likes this beer, then it's definitely going to be good." Chapter 569. Ding. Congratulations to the host for completing the mission of declaring war on all the chefs in the world. The reward of 0.5 strength has been issued. You have accumulated 1 strength point. Would the host like to use it now? The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "I refuse." Meg didn't even think about it. He didn't want to experience the thrill of being electrocuted in public. With so many people watching, he might be treated as a lunatic and killed on the spot. That wasn't worth it. By the time the duel ended, the number of onlookers had reached close to 2,000. This was undoubtedly an excellent advertisement for Mamie's. It also increased the restaurant's exposure outside of the Aden Square food rankings. "Boss, give me 10 more kebabs and a beer." "Beer," Febid said loudly. He couldn't take his eyes off the kebabs beside the grill. "If it's possible, I'd also like 2 kebabs and a glass of beer. Hill looked at Meg with a smile. She would control her intake for every meal, but today, she wanted to break this rule. Only good food could not disappoint her. I don't mind trying the delicious kebabs and beer, the professor said with a smile. Mr. Mack, why don't you open for business tonight as well? You can sell kebabs and beer. Let us have a taste. We can only look but not eat, but we're craving it. Harrison shouted in the crowd, which immediately caused a commotion. The onlookers' eyes lit up. Such delicious kebabs, even if the price was a little expensive, were worth a try. Moreover, there were so many people here. If the boss knew how to do business, he definitely wouldn't reject their requests. If he opened for business, it would definitely attract many customers. Meg looked at the pairs of expectant eyes and shook his head with a smile. Sorry, the remaining kebabs are for our own dinner. We won't be selling them to the public. If the judges still want to eat, you can come back tomorrow when the restaurant is open for business. Everyone can also come back during business hours. He actually rejected Miss Hill and Febid's requests. I'm so disappointed. Why did I come here to suffer this kind of torture? Sigh, it seems that I have to come early tomorrow morning to line up. I can already foresee a long line at the entrance of the restaurant tomorrow. All right, even Miss Hill can't eat beef kebabs, so I feel a lot better even if I can't. Let's wait for tomorrow then. Hearing Meg's words, the crowd was in a state of shock. Many people were surprised that Meg had once again rejected the Hill's offer. Moreover, it was only 2 kebabs. All right, then I'll have to wait until I'm free to eat this delicious roast beef kebab. A hint of surprise flashed through Hill's eyes. This was the first man who had rejected her twice in a row. However, she did not show any displeasure on her face. She stood up and looked at Meg with a smile. Thank you for your hospitality. I look forward to Mr. Meg correcting more definitions of delicacies. I think that will be a wonderful thing. I think that will be the case. Meg also nodded in response. He took a glance at the departing figure, then withdrew his gaze and expressed his gratitude to Robert and the others. Without any further discussion, he rejected Febid's request for another glass of beer. Mr. Mack, you've obtained a new restaurant. Are you planning to move Amy's there or open a new branch? If I recall correctly, Ricky's rotisserie is several times larger than Amy's. Harrison squeezed his way through the crowd to the front with a curious look on his face. Many people who were preparing to leave also turned to look at Meg with curiosity in their eyes. Amy's was indeed too small, and it was quite possible that they wouldn't even be able to get a seat if they wanted to eat such delicious food in the future. Well, I haven't decided what I'm going to do with that restaurant yet, but Amy's won't be moving, at least not in the near future. Meg shook his head with a smile. All right, then let's hope that Amy's can open a new branch as soon as possible. That way, we won't have to wait so long in line. Harrison nodded in response. Meg merely smiled in response. He really hadn't decided what he was going to do with Ricky's rotisserie yet. Everyone, please disperse for now. Amy's will be releasing 3 flavors of roast beef kebabs and beer tomorrow. Each kebab will have 5 beef cubes, and you're all welcome to try them, Meg announced loudly with a smile. There's 5 cubes? Boss Meg is so generous. We'll be here first thing in the morning, Mr. Mack. You can't just not serve them in the morning like you did with the roast fish. I'm leaving. I have to find a restaurant to fill my stomach. I'm so hungry that I'm about to collapse. Meg's words created another stir among the onlookers, and they began to disperse. The lawn in front of the restaurant had been trampled, and it was a complete mess. Father is so awesome. Amy looked up at Meg with reverence in her eyes. She then pouted as she said, but baby still wants to eat roast meat. Meow, ugly duckling also let out a cry as it rubbed its head against Meg's foot. All right, father will make it for you too. Meg felt as if his heart were about to melt at the sight of the 2 little ones. He turned to Yabba-Mia, who was tidying up the cups, and said, Mia, put the table back where it was, then wait for dinner with Amy. All right. A sweet smile appeared on Yabba-Mia's face. She was also very curious as to just what kind of delicious roast beef kebabs were that even someone as prestigious as young Mistress Hill couldn't resist the urge to order 2 more. This guy is so stingy. He's going too far. Thebid turned to look at Meg with an enraged expression as he stomped his foot. However, he couldn't help but heave a forlorn sigh as his gaze fell on the roast rack in front of him. He walked over with a conflicted expression as he murmured to himself, "But how can there be such delicious roast beef in this world? It completely satisfies all of my fantasies about roast beef. In fact, it has far exceeded my imagination. If I hadn't tasted it myself, I wouldn't have believed that there would be someone in this world who could make such delicious food. Even though this guy's mouth is almost half as good as mine, the problem now is, how should I write this article? I can't find any fault with it at all." The crowd dispersed, and Amy's returned to silence. The sky had already turned completely dark, and a full moon hung high in the sky. For Western-style street lamps were lit up, and the warm light illuminated the entrance of the restaurant. Yabamiya and Amy sat at a nearby table, resting their chins on their hands as they looked at Meg with anticipation in their eyes. The aroma of roast beef wafted through the air, and it was extremely enticing. Chapter 570. Come to think of it, it's been 3 years since I last came to Chaos City. I wonder if Alex is doing well with that little girl. Outside Chaos City, a fleet of carriages slowly approached. A young man lifted the curtains of his carriage and looked up at the 4 large characters on the city wall with a concerned look on his face. Under the moonlight, only an ordinary face could be seen. If it weren't for the scar at the corner of his eye, he would have been completely unrecognizable in a crowd. This guy is too stubborn. He refuses to accept a single cent. Even if he has a place to stay in Chaos City, he's definitely not doing well. I'll go visit him after I finish my business tomorrow. It's been 3 years. Those people should have given up by now. The curtains of the carriage were slowly drawn down, and a voice that only he could hear sounded from within the carriage. The carriage passed the inspection and continued onward toward the city. Further away, a knight in a black robe was also slowly making his way toward Chaos City. At the entrance of Amy's mid-autumn celebration, Amy and Yabamiya both turned to Meg with surprise etched on their faces. "Oh, Father, are you going to make mooncakes with the moon for Amy?" Amy quickly came to her senses and turned to Meg with an expectant look in her eyes. "That's right. I'm going to make mooncakes for everyone tomorrow." Meg nodded with a smile. He looked at the confused Yabamiya and gave her a brief explanation of the Mid-Autumn Festival, as well as the significance of the celebration. "So it's a festival from your hometown, boss, and it has such an important meaning behind it. Reunion really is a wonderful thing." Yabamiya's eyes lit up, but they quickly dimmed, and she forced a smile onto her face. Meg looked at Yabamiya with a warm expression and said, "I want everyone to be able to experience the sweetness of reunion. And I also want those who can't be reunited to be able to experience the warmth of reunion." "Thank you, boss." Yabamiya looked into Meg's eyes and nodded with gratitude. "All right, have a taste of my delicious roast beef kebabs." Meg placed all the kebabs in his hands onto a plate and placed it on the table. The kebabs of 3 flavors were stacked in 3 small piles, and there was no need for him to eat all 3 flavors for himself. "Boss, do you need me to get you a beer?" Mia looked at Meg and asked. Those people seemed to like to drink the malt beer with a special aroma. "We've won a restaurant today, so it's worth having a drink to celebrate." "Thank you, Mia." Meg nodded with a smile, not forgetting to remind her, "Remember to add ice?" I want some too. I want some good beer too." Amy raised her little hand and yelled with a piece of beef in her mouth. "No, Mia is still young. She can't drink. Mia is still underage. She can't drink either. You can only drink when you're older." Meg shook his head with a serious expression. This damn system was never serious. After coaxing Amy to sleep, Meg took a hot shower and lay down on his bed. He fell into deep thought as he looked at the glowing mooncake experience bag and the 1 point of strength that had been added to it. Meg took a look at Amy, who was lying on the bed, and gritted his teeth. "System, I want to level up first. Just give me 1 point of strength." Would the host like to proceed with the recovery of strength in 2 batches, or would the host like to proceed with the recovery in 1 go? The system prompted, No shit, if I can do it in one go, then of course it's best. Meg replied without any hesitation. Okay, because the recovery this time will cause a large commotion, please find an empty space to proceed with the recovery. The system's voice sounded again. Meg looked at Amy, who was sleeping peacefully on the bed, and got up to the balcony. He stood in the middle of the balcony and nodded. System, I'm ready. Ding. Host, please close your eyes and prepare to be struck by lightning. The system prompted. Huh. Chapter 571. Fuck you, system. Mag only had time to curse in his heart before a bolt of silver lightning flashed across the sky like a silver thread. The lightning bolt that was as thick as a water bucket struck him directly on the head. The electric current instantly spread throughout his entire body, and his arms and legs began to tremble uncontrollably as if he were dancing in the lightning. That night, all of the residents of Chaos City heard a thunderclap, as if it had exploded right next to their ears. Many people were roused from their slumber, and they couldn't understand why there was such a loud clap of thunder when the moon was high up in the sky. Mother, I think I saw someone dancing in the lightning. A little boy yelled excitedly as he leaned against the window. Piss off and go to bed. Otherwise, I'll show you what it's like to dance under a plank. The curtains were drawn shut, and an authoritative woman's voice sounded. After an indeterminate period of time, Meg finally regained feeling in his body. He raised his hand to touch his face, only to find that his fingertips had gone numb, and he hurriedly put his hand down. He couldn't help but grumble internally, System, it's just an upgrade to my physical strength. Why did you have to strike me with lightning? Do you think I'm transcending a tribulation? His clothes had already been charred beyond recognition, and even the slightest movement would leave a trail of dust on the ground. Thankfully, the key areas of his body were still intact. You were the one who requested to upgrade your physical strength by 1 point. Due to the fact that you were severely injured at the time, you would need to undergo a high-intensity lightning strike in order to recover your vitality. Normal electric current is no longer effective, so the system used a variety of conduction technologies to extract a portion of the lightning from the sky and guide it to your body. Shouldn't you be praising the greatness of science now? The system's smug voice sounded. Meg rolled his eyes and couldn't be bothered to argue with the system any further. Instead, he began to carefully sense his own body. The numbness in his muscles was quickly dispelling, and he slowly stepped forward. The feeling of power slowly flowed from his feet to his body, and with each step he took, he was struck by a brand new sensation. This was a feeling that he was more powerful than before, and this feeling was constantly improving. After reaching the edge of the balcony, Meg stopped in his tracks. The numbness brought on by the lightning had already been completely dispelled. He clenched his fists, and a sense of power welled up in his heart. He felt like he could kill an ironhide bull with a single punch. So this is what the physical quality of a level 3 knight feels like. This world is really mysterious. What's circulating in my body should be the so-called spiritual energy. Meg closed his eyes and carefully felt the thing that was circulating in his body. It was like a stream of chi, but also like a kind of liquid. Spiritual power was something unique to the Norland continent. Magic casters cultivated their spiritual power through meditation. Dragons were born with powerful physiques and the ability to constantly evolve. Demons could advance through bloodlines. Forest trolls and demons all had their own unique methods of advancement. The reason why the weak humans were able to establish themselves on the Norland continent, which was filled with powerful races, and gradually grow into one of the 8 major races was not only due to the awakening of magic casters, but also due to the discovery and mastery of the cultivation of spiritual power, which gave ordinary humans a way to quickly advance in power, and gave them the ability to fight against powerful races and even giant dragons, which was also a decisive factor. Spiritual power could constantly push the limits of a human's body, and also allow them to unleash incredible strength and speed. This was why human knights weren't afraid of powerful demons. For example, a top-tier knight like Megalex could even slay dragons. However, not everyone could cultivate spiritual energy. Only 1 out of 100 could become a knight. Only after breaking through to the level 3 knight could one cultivate spiritual energy. After that, one's cultivation and spiritual energy were closely related to each other and almost complemented each other. Meg opened his eyes and quickly strode over to the small room on the balcony. He picked up the long sword in the box in the corner and stepped forward. The long sword was unsheathed, and a cold light flashed through the blade of the sword. It was as if the air had been sliced open, and even the moonlight seemed to have blurred slightly. A faint smile appeared on Meg's face. It was the same sword strike, but it was clearly faster and more powerful than before. What he had to do now was improve his swordsmanship to a level that matched his power as quickly as possible. After stowing away his sword and cleaning up the rags on the ground, Meg went downstairs to take a shower before entering the test field for the god of cookery to learn how to make mooncakes and practice his swordsmanship. However, as soon as he entered the bathroom, he was given a fright by his own reflection in the mirror. In the mirror, he was completely black, with only a pair of charred black shorts on his body. He looked like a miner who had just crawled out of a mine. Only his teeth were white, and his short hair was spiky, making him look very fashionable. System, I'm only at the 3rd tier, and I've already been struck by lightning. Will I be struck by lightning 5 times next? Meg asked as he looked at himself in the mirror with a strange expression. Host, don't worry. This system won't do something so cruel. The system's voice sounded with a hint of consolation. You haven't experienced 2 strikes of lightning yet, right? Let's take it one step at a time. There's no need to rush. Meg, who was just about to relax, raised an eyebrow. As expected, the system couldn't be trusted. The first strike of lightning today had already shocked him to death. If there were 2 strikes, he would probably be electrocuted to death. Furthermore, if someone told him to slim down like a bolt of lightning in the future, he would definitely tell them that lightning was at least as thick as water. Although he was angry, Meg still quickly began to wash up. The layer of soot on his body was quickly washed away, and his skin returned to its normal color. It was bright and white, and it should have been nourished by lightning. It felt quite delicate to the touch. His thin and frail body had now become very normal. Although he didn't have exaggerated bulging muscles, his well-proportioned body didn't lose any sense of strength. He could clearly see a six-pack on his lower abdomen, and he was very satisfied with all of this. This was completely his ideal body. Withdrawing his narcissistic gaze, Meg put on a set of pajamas and tiptoed into the room. As soon as he lay down on the bed, he immediately opened the shiny golden experience bag in his mind. A wave of information flowed into Meg's mind, and it quickly merged with his memories, quickly becoming Meg's experience and memories. Chapter 572. Host, you're being unfair here. As a candidate for the god of cookery, you shouldn't be saying such unprofessional things. The system's serious voice sounded before it introduced in detail, there are many different types of mooncakes in China. According to their origins, they are Beijing-style mooncakes, Cantonese-style mooncakes, Suzhou-style mooncakes, Taiwan-style mooncakes, Yunnan-style mooncakes, Hong Kong-style mooncakes, Chow-style mooncakes, Hui-style mooncakes, Chu-style mooncakes, and Qin-style mooncakes. In terms of flavors, there are sweet, salty, sweet, and spicy. In terms of fillings, there are osmanthus mooncakes, plum mooncakes, 5-kernel mooncakes, red bean paste, rock sugar, ginkgo, pork floss, black sesame, ham mooncakes, egg yolk mooncakes, and so on. In terms of crust, there are starch crust, mixed sugar crust, puff crust, and cream crust. In terms of appearance, there are also smooth and lacy mooncakes. All types of mooncakes have their own unique flavors, and there are countless people who love them. As a chef, you should try to make every type of mooncake to the best of your ability, instead of narrow-mindedly judging them based on your own tastes. Besides, are 5-kernel mooncakes really that hard to swallow? No, there's no such thing as bad food, only bad chefs. In that case, let's start with making the most delicious 5-kernel mooncakes. Meg raised an eyebrow with a peculiar expression. System, where did you copy this from? I'm aware that there are many types of mooncakes, but I really can't imagine what it's like to add meat to a mooncake. I have to make a perfect and delicious 5-kernel mooncake. Aren't you making things difficult for me? Cooking is all about using ingredients and putting in effort. No matter how strange the recipe is, as long as you use the best ingredients and put in a lot of effort, you'll definitely be able to turn it into a delicious dish. I'm going to teach you the cooking methods for 8 types of mooncakes, and I hope you'll be able to learn all of them in the meantime, the system said with a serious expression. All right, it's good to have more flavors. Perhaps everyone will be able to have a memorable mid-autumn festival. Meg nodded. He was feeling a little troubled about how to learn the cooking methods for 8 types of mooncakes in a short time, and he also had to squeeze out some time to practice his swordsmanship. He pushed open the door to the test field for the god of cookery with his spiritual power, and white light flashed, following which he found himself in a sealed kitchen. There were a few pots and mooncake molds on the stove, and everything looked very complete. 5 kernels, 5 kernels. It was all right when I was young, but the more I grew up, the more I felt like it was the dark cuisine of the mooncake world. A small mooncake is stuffed with almonds, peach kernels, peanut kernels, hemp kernels, and melon seeds. The soft mooncake is wrapped around the hard nuts. Meg muttered a few words to himself. However, he was still seriously recalling how to make the 5-kernel mooncakes in his mind. He broke down each and every step in detail. After a while, he took out flour and various nuts from the cabinet and began to make the mooncakes. The process of making mooncakes was quite complicated. The creation of the crust, filling, and baking all required good control. However, Meg had made so many bhaji buns, so the creation of the crust was naturally not a problem for him. As for the filling, he had the assistance of a grinding tool, so it wasn't all that difficult to stuff the fillings into the mooncakes. The baking process was carried out in an oven, and after the mooncakes were baked to a golden brown, they were brushed with a layer of egg liquid before being placed back into the oven to bake. Thus, a set of 5-kernel mooncakes was completed. Meg grabbed a handful of flour and found that the white and smooth flour was completely devoid of any coarse particles. It was slightly different from the flour used to make bhaji buns. The golden almonds were plump, while the white peach kernels, purple-skinned peanuts, hemp kernels, and melon seeds were all exuding a unique nutty fragrance. Meg picked up a melon seed and placed it into his mouth. The melon seed's fragrance spread through his mouth, and after swallowing, the aftertaste lingered in his mouth. System, what kind of melon seeds are these? Meg asked as his brows furrowed. Just right, the system replied. Are you happy to be cheeky? Meg curled his lips. The quality of the melon seeds was just like the other ingredients produced by the system. A simple melon seed could bring about a wonderful experience. If the other nuts were of the same quality, even if he directly grabbed a handful of them and put them into his mouth, it would also be a delicious experience. However, Meg felt that it was a pity that he had to wrap these top-notch nuts into the mooncakes to make 5-kernel mooncakes. It was simply a waste of top-notch ingredients. The system has selected and cultivated the melon seeds and planted them on the Taburata Highlands. With 16 hours of super long sunlight and fertile black soil, the best melon seeds will grow. Then, the most plump melon seeds will be selected to ensure that all of them are of the same size and that none of them will rot. The almonds are. The system began to introduce the various ingredients in detail. One after another, strange places came out of its mouth. Meg had some memories of many of them. They were places that Meg Alex had been to before. Many of them were important places for various races. Normally speaking, no one would think of planting vegetables in those places. System, although I also want to make high-quality mooncakes, I plan to provide the mooncakes for the Mid-Autumn Festival Gala tomorrow for free. Furthermore, I will only make them for one day. So, can the ingredients be slightly less high-end? After listening to the system's introduction, Meg could already guess that the melon seeds were going to be sold by the seeds. Host, as an excellent chef, the most basic requirement is to carefully prepare every dish. This requirement should be done to the extreme from the moment you choose the ingredients. Choosing inferior ingredients when there are better options is a disrespect to the guests. It is also a blasphemy to the word chef. The system's solemn voice sounded. System, do you think there's something wrong with my brain? I don't know how many people will come to the gala tomorrow, but it definitely won't be any less than the number of people who came to watch the gala tonight. Even if everyone only eats one mooncake, I'll have to give out at least 2,000 to 3,000 mooncakes. Those are all free. If the cost of the ingredients is too high, won't I be making a huge loss? Meg rolled his eyes with a grin and said, "How about this? I'll take the 99 melon seeds that you discarded. I'll also take all of the almonds that were eliminated due to the difference in size. In any case, pack up all of the leftover ingredients that you chose for me. It's quite a pity that you threw them away, so I'll kindly accept all of them. I'll purchase them according to the current market price. I won't earn a single cent from this deal. I'm completely helping you, a vegetable farmer." Even though it sounds very reasonable, I still feel like something isn't quite right. The system was a little hesitant as it said, "So, should I be moved? Isn't this worth crying over?" Meg asked in a matter-of-fact manner. A faint smile appeared on his face as he washed his hands and began to knead the dough to make the mooncakes. Chapter 573. In a small courtyard in the northern part of Chaos City, there was a room lit by a dim oil lamp. 8 people in black with a black cloth over their faces were sitting around a long table. The black-robed figure sitting at the head of the table looked at everyone present and said in a serious voice, "This is already the 10th day that we've been in Chaos City, and we still haven't found anything. We've already searched through all of the civilian areas, but we still haven't found anything related to that man. As such, I'm going to adjust our search strategy and change our target from that man to a half-elf girl between 3 and 5 years of age." But leader, General Seuss told us to continue searching through all of the areas according to our original plan. It doesn't seem like a good idea to suddenly change our target. A thin, black-robed figure sitting down hesitantly said. All of the other black-robed figures were also rather hesitant. General Seuss has actually already given up on Chaos City, and the Second Prince's secret letter suggests the same. He believes that man will appear on the Demon Islands instead of Chaos City. Narsen shook his head and said, "However, our team can only continue to search Chaos City until we receive the order. In that case, there's no need for us to continue searching, right? Perhaps General Seuss will be able to find that man very soon." Indeed, General Seuss must have received some concrete information, and that's why he rushed to the Demon Islands in such a hurry. All of the black-robed figures chimed in upon hearing that. "We receive many pieces of information like that every day. We've been to the Demon Islands no less than 10 times, but we still haven't found anything." Narsen shook his head again before turning to all of the black-robed figures and said in a serious voice, "I still think that Chaos City is the most likely place for that man to be hiding, as it's much more difficult to detect him here than it is to hide in the wilderness. All of you know who that man is. We haven't been able to ascertain whether he's dead or not in the past 3 years, but if he really is still alive and we can find and kill him in Chaos City, then all of you will become heroes of the Black Falcons." Narsen raised his voice slightly as he continued, "The generous rewards will be enough for us to retire for the rest of our lives. If you're willing to stay in the Black Falcons, then you'll no longer just be ordinary members of the Black Falcons. Instead, you'll be on par with the General and be revered by all of the Black Falcons." The eyes of the black-robed men gradually lit up as they looked at Narsen. It was as if a light was shining from the depths of their eyes. "Tell us what we should do, leader. We'll do whatever you say." The thin, black-robed man from before looked at Narsen with an excited expression, and his eyes were filled with fervor and excitement. "It's very simple. We'll be able to find a half-elf girl between 3 and 5 years of age. Compared to a crippled young man, that's clearly a man. You of the Black Falcons, and the Black Falcons arse right, of course, S, and you rees S. You'll be skipping past the areas that you've already checked and heading south. You're not looking for speed, but you must be careful." Narsen nodded. "I've already been following Lewis for over half a year, and I've never noticed anything strange about him. I haven't seen him use any private means to communicate with the outside world, either. Perhaps there's nothing going on between him and Alex, and he's just a crippled merchant. Could it be that His Highness' suspicions are wrong? The observation period will be up in a month, and I'll be able to end this surveillance mission. There shouldn't be any disturbances, right? A black-robed figure murmured to himself on a large tree outside a tavern. He was staring intently at a figure who was pacing back and forth in a room on the second floor of the tavern. After a while, the lights went out, and that person seemed to have fallen asleep. "Where is Alex?" Bertley stayed on the tree for a long while, and only slowly slid down the tree after ascertaining that there was no movement in that room. He quickly disappeared into the inky black alleyway. Not long after that, a carrier pigeon flew out of Chaos City toward the north. 8 types of mooncakes, 8 different cooking methods, and 8 completely different requirements. Meg patiently completed all of them to perfection, and only after passing all of the system's requirements did he begin to practice his swordsmanship in the trial field. The next morning, Meg was awakened by the sound of his alarm clock. He turned it off and got out of bed as soon as he opened his eyes. He sat on the edge of his bed and once again sensed the powerful energy coursing through his body. A smile appeared on his face, and he made his way over to Amy's bedside before going downstairs to prepare the ingredients that he would need for the morning service. A long line had already formed in front of the restaurant early in the morning. Many of them were customers who had come early in the morning to line up after watching the battle between Meg and Ricky the day before. When Sally and Yabamiya arrived, they were both surprised to see that the line was more than twice as long as usual. "I think it's because Boss beat the fat owner of the rotisserie yesterday, and all of these customers came early in the morning after seeing Boss's rotisserie kebabs," Yabamiya said with a contemplative expression. "Rotisserie kebabs?" Sally turned to Yabamiya with a perplexed expression. "Aisha, you didn't come last night, so I came here because I had nothing to do. Boss and Amy just so happened to come back." Yabamiya recalled that Sally hadn't come last night, so she gave them a brief recount of what had happened. In the end, she excitedly said, "Boss's rotisserie kebabs are super delicious. I don't think I've ever had such delicious rotisserie meat in my life. Boss said that he's going to hold a mid-autumn festival banquet tonight, and he's going to invite many customers to eat mooncakes. It's definitely going to be another type of delicious food. I didn't think that I would have missed such an exciting cooking competition last night." Sally wore a wistful expression. She had been to the restaurant in the morning and at noon the day before, but Meg hadn't come back, so she didn't come back at night. Who would have thought that something like this would happen? This kind old man was not to be trifled with when he was angry. A new dish? Crassus' interest was immediately piqued, and he reached out to take the breakfast. "Yes, Teacher Crassus. Father's new beef kebab is super delicious. You should try it this afternoon. You'll love it for sure." Amy chimed in. Crassus nodded at Meg and said, "All right, I'll forgive you this time for little Amy's sake. But next time, if you want to take Amy to skip class again, you have to choose a time when Julian is in class. Otherwise, that fellow's progress will be faster than mine, and he'll definitely brag to me that long-range magic is better than melee magic." "All right, I'll try my best to choose a suitable time." Meg nodded as he patted Amy's head with a smile and said, "Then I'm going back to cook now. Sorry to bother you, Amy." "Goodbye, Father." Amy waved at Meg before following Crassus into the magic lab. Meg exited Chaos School and rode his bicycle toward the restaurant. He stopped in front of Ricky's rotisserie and discovered that the restaurant's doors were tightly shut. 3 of the signboards had already been torn down, and there was no one in the restaurant. Everything was strewn about chaotically, and it appeared that it had been cleaned up the night before. However, the tables and chairs appeared to still be in good condition, so it would most likely only require some simple modifications before it could open for business. Ricky's rotisserie was around 3 times the size of Amy's, with over 200 square meters of space. Furthermore, it was located near the entrance to the square, so there was a lot of traffic. Its location was far superior to that of Mamie's, which was located in the corner of the square. Just those 2 factors alone would allow the restaurant to earn tens of thousands of copper coins per month. If he were to purchase the restaurant, he would have to pay at least 10 million copper coins to purchase it. However, the restaurant now belonged to Meg. Meg had been too busy to complete the handover last night, so he hadn't been in a hurry to complete the handover. After the morning service, He was going to make a trip to the city lord's castle to seek assistance from the Aiden Square management office so that he could officially take over the restaurant. If he were to sell the restaurant, Meg would indeed receive a large sum of money. With such a prime location, he wouldn't have to worry about a lack of takers. However, after an entire night of contemplation, Meg had already made up his mind. As such, he wasn't planning to sell the restaurant. Instead, he was planning to make it the first branch of Mamie's. Aside from the restaurant on the first floor, he could also make full use of the space on the second floor, thereby providing ample conditions for Mamie's to expand. It's better than I thought, but the key is still to fool the system in order for the plan to proceed. Aside from diverting some of the customers, the branch will also bring in more revenue. However, I'm not in a hurry to expand on a large scale right now. I'll focus on making it bigger. Meg looked at Ricky's rotisserie, which was a little deserted, and nodded with a pleased expression before riding his bicycle toward the restaurant. When Meg returned to the restaurant, Sally and Mia had already finished their breakfast. Meg changed into his chef's uniform, and he glanced at the clock on the wall before quickly making his way over to the restaurant. He opened the door to the restaurant, and a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the ridiculously long line outside. Welcome. Everyone filed in, and the restaurant was quickly filled to the brim. Boss, I want 10 beef kebabs. Do you have to be so fierce this early in the morning? No, I want 10 kebabs as well. You're going to be a huge blow to the customers in the line. So, please give me 9 kebabs. Chapter 575. My apologies, but in consideration of the large number of customers, we have limited the number of beef kebabs to 5 per person, Meg said with a smile. The customers who had lined up early in the morning were clearly here for the beef kebabs. He couldn't provide an unlimited supply of kebabs to everyone, so he limited the number of kebabs to ensure that more customers would be able to eat what they wanted to eat. All right, then we'll have 5 kebabs first. It's a good thing that the owner has a conscience. 5 kebabs per kebabs should be enough to fill our stomachs. The customers were slightly disappointed when they heard this, but they quickly accepted the limited number of kebabs. This also allowed the customers behind to heave a sigh of relief. At the very least, they would have a chance to eat the delicious beef kebabs. Also, Mamie's will be holding a Mid-Autumn Festival Gala tonight. We have prepared Mid-Autumn Festival mooncakes for everyone, and all of you are welcome to attend. The restaurant will be distributing mooncakes to everyone, so if you're free, feel free to come over and have some fun. Meg invited everyone to the Mid-Autumn Festival Gala tonight. The more lively the gala, the better. Mid-Autumn Festival Gala? The restaurant is distributing mooncakes? It shouldn't be free, right? Mamie's is hosting a gala tonight, so we definitely can't miss it. I just don't know what kind of cake the mooncakes are. Could it be a cake made from the moon? If that's the case, won't the restaurant be closed at night? The customers' eyes lit up when they heard this, and all of them became curious. However, Meg turned around and entered the kitchen. He didn't explain too much. A sense of mystery was the most attractive thing. Dear customer, there are 3 flavors of beef kebabs. Please choose one first. Yabamiya smiled as he flipped open the menu for the customer. Pictures of the 3 flavors of beef kebabs were already on the menu. The lifelike beef kebabs were glistening with oil, and the delicious taste seemed to be seeping out of the pictures. This price seems a little expensive. How about 300 copper coins for a kebab? The customer asked Yabamiya when he saw the price on the menu. All of the customers began to flip through the menus, and upon seeing the prices of all of the dishes, many of the first-time customers couldn't help but gasp. The prices on this menu were even more ridiculous than those at Dukas restaurant. Even the cheapest dish, the tofu pudding, cost 200 copper coins, which was quite a hefty sum for many people. All of them turned to look at Yabamiya. Could it be that the owner of the restaurant had changed the prices overnight because he had won against the owner of Ricky's rotisserie yesterday? Dear customer, the price of the food in the restaurant is according to the menu. There is no second price. Yabamiya smiled and shook her head. She had to deal with a lot of such guests every day, but there seemed to be more of them this morning. The customer looked at Yabamiya's calm smile, and he was a little embarrassed by his own thoughts. He hesitated momentarily before closing the menu, and nodding as he said, "Then give me a spicy kebab and a sauce-flavored kebab." Randy's blacksmith shop had only just begun to take off, and he hadn't recouped his initial investment yet. Spending 600 copper coins for breakfast was quite extravagant for him, but after witnessing the battle the night before, he was deeply attracted to the alluring aroma of the kebabs. Even though it was a little expensive, he still wanted to taste the kebabs for himself. Some of the customers in the queue hesitated for a moment before choosing to leave. The price of 300 copper coins was not something that everyone could afford. This kind of extravagance belonged to a minority of people. Mr. Mac's dishes are always top-notch, so don't worry. It's definitely a bargain to be able to eat such delicious food at such a low price. The regulars of Mamie's ordered their dishes one after another. Many of them were quite familiar with the new dish, and the price wasn't expensive compared to the other dishes. It was completely within the acceptable range. In the kitchen, Meg looked at the customers leaving and sighed in his heart. He also wanted to bring a delicious experience to everyone, but for the current Mamie's, it was obviously impossible. He needed more money to upgrade the restaurant, buy more strength points, and increase his strength. Before he had the ability to protect himself, no one could stop him from earning money. The 2-meter-long grill was filled with kebabs. Meg deftly flipped the kebabs and then brushed them with 3 different sauces. The rich aroma of the kebabs instantly filled the kitchen. The kebabs were placed on plates according to the order that Mia had ordered, and Mia carried them out and placed in front of the customers. The rich aroma of the kebabs spread in the restaurant, and the customers couldn't help but salivate. The customers who were still hesitating before began to order their dishes. With such an aroma and the reviews of the 5 judges yesterday, it would be cruel to not try it. Apart from the kebabs, there's also a beer. It's a pity that it's not good to drink alcohol so early in the morning. I'll try it again at night. Many customers also noticed the beer on the menu, but since it was still morning, not many chose to drink. Harrison, who had come to line up early in the morning, had successfully obtained the first batch of kebabs. He didn't know how many times he had swallowed his saliva last night. This time, looking at the 5 kebabs in front of him, he reached out and grabbed a garlic-flavored kebab, put it to his mouth, and blew on it. Ignoring the fact that it was still a little hot, he opened his mouth and bit into the beef. This taste. Chapter 576. Meg stopped the car in front of the City Lord's castle, and his eyes lit up at the sight of the grand Western-style building. Large white stone pillars that were engraved with decorative patterns were connected together, and the grayish-white domed buildings were distributed in a picturesque manner. The 2 large iron gates at the entrance were wide open, and the words City Master's Mansion were written on them using the common language of the world. This was the first time Meg had come to the City Lord's castle. Dicus was the one who had asked him to sign the contract for the open-air restaurant, so he had to ask for directions first. "Mr. Mac, why are you here? Do you have something to do?" A familiar voice sounded from behind Meg before he had even walked through the gate. Meg turned around and smiled as he said, "Greetings, Master Dicus. I'm here to take over a restaurant in the City Lord's castle, and I need to go to the Aiden Square office to complete some procedures." Take over a restaurant? Could it be that Mr. Mac is preparing to open a new branch? Dicus looked at Meg with a surprised expression. Not yet. There was a restaurant owner yesterday. Meg shook his head with a smile and gave Dicus a brief recount of what had happened the night before. Dicus was an official of the City Lord's castle, and if he could help, the process of taking over the restaurant would be a lot simpler. "I didn't think that someone would dare to challenge Mr. Mac to a cooking duel. That's very brave of you." Dicus smiled as he pointed at the gate of the City Lord's castle and said, "However, since you've already signed the duel agreement, and there are so many witnesses here, that restaurant naturally belongs to Mr. Mac now. Let me take you in. The procedures will be completed soon, and Mr. Mac will only have to pay a small fee." "Thank you." Meg nodded as he followed Dicus into the City Lord's castle. The buildings in the City Lord's mansion were symmetrical, with 2-story buildings on both sides. the staff of the city lord's mansion, and the people coming in and out of the buildings on the left. In comparison, the buildings on the right were much quieter. The department on the left is responsible for the daily affairs of Chaos City. They have to receive many residents and take care of many things every day, so they're quite busy. The department on the right is responsible for the daily patrols of Chaos City, so it's a little quieter. That's because most of their work is done outside the city lord's jurisdiction, Dicus explained. Mag nodded with a contemplative expression before asking, I see. Which department does Master Dicus belong to in the city lord's castle? I'm currently part of the city lord's mansion secretariat. I'm actually responsible for running errands everywhere, Dicus said with a smile. This leg, but many people want to run. Meg chuckled as he reassessed Dicus. Dicus shook his head, and a serious expression appeared on his face as he continued. The renovation project funded by the city lord's castle is almost complete. The living conditions of the miners' families will be significantly improved. At the same time, the city lord's castle has verified the compensation and funeral funds that the miners' families have embezzled over the years. They've all been distributed, and all children of suitable age have the opportunity to become students of Chaos School. All of the people involved in this case have been arrested, and they'll face the most severe punishment. I'm sure the city lord's castle will give all of the miners' families a fair result. Meg nodded. This was undoubtedly a good result for those who had lived in the abyss. The city lord's castle had already shown enough sincerity. Dicus nodded at Meg and said, the city lord once said that if there were more nosy people like Meg in this world, then Chaos City would definitely become a better place. I hope something like this won't happen again. After all, this is Chaos City, isn't it? Meg shook his head and bade farewell to Dicus before exiting the city lord's castle. Chapter 577. In the miners' residential area in the northern part of the city, the low, grayish-black, dilapidated houses had been transformed into brand-new two-story buildings. The exterior walls were painted in bright green, blue, pink, a sea of bright colors, making people feel as if they were in spring in this autumn day. Dwarven craftsmen were busy in the small buildings. Strong orcs were stacking square stones on the walls. Old people and women were holding paintbrushes and painting the walls with bright colors. They all had happy smiles on their faces, just like those bright colors. The children were running and laughing on the road, paved with bluestone slabs. A simple football made of rattan had become their favorite toy. A large group of children ran with the rattan ball, and their laughter spread throughout the miners' residential area. The rattan ball was kicked away by the leading child. It rolled a few times, and a bicycle was unable to stop in time, so it ran over the ball. Creak! The bicycle came to a stop, and Mag turned around to look at the ball of rattan that had been flattened into a ball of rattan. He then turned to look at the children who had suddenly stopped in their tracks. They looked at Mag's bicycle, and then at the ball of rattan on the ground with expressions of disbelief on their faces. He was also rather stunned. Boo-hoo! He flattened our ball. We don't have a ball to play with. A 4- or 5-year-old child was the first to cry. Then, as if the crying was contagious, more than 20 children started crying in an instant. The crying was so loud that it attracted a lot of attention. Many adults even wanted to rush over. Don't cry, don't cry. It's a rattan ball. I'll give you a better one. Meg hurriedly waved his hand. These little guys were really not to be trifled with. Even Amy never cried like this. Amy's father. A surprised voice suddenly rang out among the children. A little girl squeezed out and ran happily in front of Meg. She looked up at Meg. Are you here to see me? Where's Amy? Is Amy here? Yes, I'm here to see Jessica. Amy has class today, so she didn't come. But you'll see her tonight. Meg looked at Jessica, who was looking up at him, and smiled as he reached out to stroke her hair. This little girl still looked so cute. It's you. That person from that day. As the crowd gathered around, an old man saw Meg pushing the bicycle. His eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but exclaim. The eyes of the people who were originally worried that something might happen to their children lit up one after another. Clearly, they all recognized the young man who had killed the bully. Thank you. Thank you for saving us all. The old man who spoke earlier immediately knelt down and kowtowed 3 times to Meg. The rest of the people also pulled their children to kneel on the ground and kowtowed to Meg to thank him. Everyone, please get up. I'm just doing what I should do. Meg quickly stopped the bicycle and reached out to pull the old man up. Only then did the rest of the people get up. However, they still looked at Meg with eyes full of gratitude. The crying children looked at the squashed rattan ball and then looked at Meg. Tears glistened in their eyes, but no one continued to cry. Meg looked at the pairs of bright eyes, and he felt a little conflicted. They had changed into new clothes, and their faces had regained some color. But now, they only had what they should have had. This was a life that had been exchanged with the lives of their loved ones, and yet they were so grateful. The crowd was silent. Meg didn't know what to say. After hesitating for a moment, he pointed at the houses and said with a smile, "The houses are very beautiful." Everyone laughed as well. Beautiful smiles blossomed on their previously stone-like faces. "Mr. Meg, you're here." Rebecca pushed open the door of a pink house and came out with a piece of embroidered cloth in her hand. She looked at Meg with surprise. "Yes, I'm here to see Jessica." Meg nodded with a smile. "Then come in and drink some water," Rebecca hurriedly said. Meg was also not used to being stared at with strange eyes by a group of people. After nodding slightly in greeting, he followed Jessica and Rebecca into the pink house. The floor of the house was paved with blue stone, and it was flat and clean. Although there was only an old wooden table and 2 chairs in the house, and it was almost empty, it was much better than the dilapidated house from before. "Please take a seat. I'll go get you some water," Rebecca said, and then turned to go into the back room. Meg pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at Jessica, who was sitting opposite him and supporting her chin with her hands. He smiled and said, "What are you thinking about, Jessica?" "I'm wondering if Amy will come over tonight. You just said that I would be able to see her tonight," Jessica said with anticipation. Meg turned to Jessica with a smile and said, "No, I'm here to invite Jessica to the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet. We're going to hold a very big banquet tonight. Do you want to come?" "Party? Can I really go?" Jessica's eyes lit up, and she looked at Meg with some incredulity. "Of course, Jessica and your mother can both come." Meg nodded seriously. "How could I trouble you again?" Rebecca came out with a bowl of water and gently placed it in front of Meg, and shook her head with embarrassment. "How could it be troublesome? Everyone is invited to the party tonight, so there will be more people and it will be more lively. You can bring your children to play." Meg took a sip of the water. It was refreshing and sweet, and the water quality was much better than last time. Rebecca looked at Meg's sincere gaze and Jessica's expectant gaze and hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Then I'll have to trouble you." "That's great. I love parties." A happy smile appeared on Jessica's face. Meg looked at a piece of cloth and a needle and thread basket on the table. There was a blooming flower embroidered on the cloth, and it looked a bit like embroidery. He curiously asked, "Are you doing embroidery now?" "Embroidery?" Rebecca looked at Meg with confusion and followed his gaze to the cloth on the table. She was a little embarrassed as she said, "I'm just doing embroidery for a cloth shop. The City Lord's castle has given us all the compensation, and Jessica will also have the opportunity to go to school, so I want to continue doing some work to earn money for Jessica's education." "Going to school is a good thing." Meg nodded and picked up the cloth on the table to examine it carefully. The needlework was very delicate. "Mr. Mack, here's a dragon coin. The compensation has been given, and the City Lord's castle has built a new house for us. I'm returning this money to you, and I'm really grateful." Rebecca pulled out a dragon coin from her pocket and handed it to Meg with gratitude. "I'm sure things will get better and better in the future." Meg accepted the dragon coin and drank the water in his hand. He stood up with a smile and said, "Then I'll be looking forward to your visit tonight. Amy also misses Jessica very much." "Okay, I'll bring the child." Rebecca nodded and walked Meg out with Jessica. "System, give me a soccer ball," Meg said in his mind, and looked at the soccer ball that quickly appeared in the cart's basket. He pushed the bicycle towards the group of children who were surrounding the crushed rattan ball with worried expressions, trying to make it into a ball again. Children, I accidentally crushed your ball just now. I'm very sorry, so I'll give you a new soccer ball. Meg stopped beside them and looked at the resentful gazes directed at him. He reached out and took the soccer ball out of the cart's basket. The children's eyes lit up. The ball with black and white cubes on its surface looked more advanced than the rattan ball. Go and play, but don't kick at sharp places or other people's windows. Meg threw the soccer ball out, and it bounced a few times on the limestone floor before rolling forward. The children immediately burst into cheers and then rushed towards the soccer ball. Meg shook his head with a smile and pushed the bicycle away. After lunch, Mamie's was going to hold a grand mid-autumn festival banquet, and everyone was invited to the banquet, attracting a lot of attention. Of course, this attention was mostly limited to Mamie's regulars. Those who weren't familiar with Mamie's thought that this was just a marketing strategy. This was quite common in the Aden Square, and some of the larger restaurants offered even greater discounts and free gifts. After all, this restaurant was only offering mooncakes, which they had never heard of before. The temporary stage has been set up. Mia, Sally, you guys put some of the mooncakes on the stage. I'll go make some more mooncakes. Chapter 578. Meg spent the entire day making mooncakes, and he canceled the dinner service so that he could focus on making more mooncakes in preparation for the Mid-Autumn Festival Gala that night. The restaurant had a simple decor, with little colored lights twined around the tree at the entrance of the restaurant a few times. There was a small sign on the lawn that told people not to step on it, and there was a large open space behind the lawn. That was clearly the main venue for tonight's gala, as the stage had been set up there. Meg's idea was very simple. He wanted to celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival in this world, so he could bring together both familiar and unfamiliar people. Prior to the expansion of the restaurant, there was no need for publicity. Just the current number of customers was enough to fill the restaurant to capacity every day. This owner really is something. His restaurant has only been open for a little over a month, and he's already made it onto the Aden Square Food Competition Rankings Board, then won over a major restaurant, and now he's holding this Mid-Autumn Festival Gala. I know, right? Ricky's Rotisserie is located at the entrance of the Aden Square, and it takes up quite a lot of space. If he were to move his restaurant there, his business would definitely increase by several-fold. Speaking of which, we should be thanking him. In the past, we rarely had customers here, but recently, our business has been increasing by leaps and bounds. Many of our customers are coming out for another meal after eating at Mamie's. Mamie's has always been different from ours. Their food starts at 200 copper coins, and they're targeting high-end restaurants. However, both rich and poor people like to eat there. Even if it's just a small dessert, customers who aren't full and don't have much money will naturally choose to eat at our restaurant. I can already sense that Dukas Restaurant's position is being threatened. If these two restaurants were to clash one day, it would definitely be very interesting. In the distance, the restaurant owners had gathered together again, and they were discussing in low voices. However, on this occasion, the atmosphere was quite harmonious, and everyone was chatting and laughing. A horse-drawn carriage drove past everyone, and Gloria lifted the curtain to look in the direction of Mamie's with a hint of nervousness in her eyes. Will Mr. Meg agree? Gloria murmured to herself, but her gaze gradually became determined. She clenched her fists and said, "This is the only chance we have to turn the tables. We have to get Mr. Mag's permission first." The carriage stopped in front of the restaurant, and Gloria slowly got off the carriage. She looked at Meg, who was about to walk into the restaurant, and quickly said, "Mr. Meg, please wait a moment." "Miss Gloria, are you looking for me?" Meg turned around and looked at Gloria in surprise. She hadn't come to the restaurant for the past few days. "Yes, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. I wonder if you have time now?" Gloria nodded. She was a little nervous as she gripped her skirt, but her eyes were still staring into Meg's eyes. "Although I don't know what you want to discuss with me, if it doesn't take up too much of my time, then please come in. The restaurant will be holding the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet soon, so I'll be a little busy, so I don't have much time." Meg looked into Gloria's beautiful lavender eyes with a smile. "It won't take up too much of your time. Gloria's face lit up with joy as she quickly nodded and followed Meg into the restaurant. Please take a seat. What does Miss Gloria want to discuss with me? Meg came out with a cup of water and gently placed it on the table as he looked at Gloria and spoke in a gentle voice. Gloria looked at Meg, and her originally nervous heart calmed down a lot. She sat down on a chair and looked at Meg, who was sitting across from her. After a moment of hesitation, she said, Mr. Meg, I'm here today to obtain your authorization for the design of Amy's dress. Authorization for the design of the dress? Meg was stunned. He looked into Gloria's sincere eyes and was a little confused for a moment. Let me reintroduce myself. I'm Gloria Moreton, the eldest granddaughter of family Moreton. I'm currently one of the candidates for the successor of the family Moreton, and I'll be competing with my second uncle, Cyril Moreton, for the position of sole successor. Gloria looked at Meg with a sincere expression. Meg raised an eyebrow and looked at the beautiful girl in front of him with undisguised surprise in his eyes. Family Moreton had controlled the Aden Chamber of Commerce for decades and was also the first family that he wanted to overthrow in his plan. The Aden Chamber of Commerce and the family Moreton behind it had become the largest group of people in Chaos City who discriminated against half-breeds because of that old man, Jeffrey Moreton. What Meg didn't expect was that this beautiful girl, who had been wearing a veil before taking it off under the special effects of the tofu pudding, was actually one of the candidates for the successor of family Moreton. This wasn't in the information that he had obtained about the family Moreton, so his first reaction was that this girl was probably a fraud. My father is Lance Moreton, and he used to be the successor of family Moreton. However, he later became a teacher at Chaos School. After taking off my veil, I made a bet with my grandfather and won the position of successor. You said that we should choose what we want to do, right? Gloria said to Meg. I see. Then congratulations, Miss Gloria. But what does this have to do with the authorization of the dress? Meg raised an eyebrow. Everything made sense now. According to the information that he had received, Jeffrey Moreton's eldest son did indeed have an 18-year-old daughter, but there was very little information about her, and he didn't even know her name. Who would have thought that she would become the successor of family Moreton in the blink of an eye after taking off her veil? Even though I've become the successor, my grandfather clearly doesn't really want to hand over family Moreton to me. It's more likely that he wants me to become the wolf behind Cyril and force him to grow. As such, what I received was a textile shop that had been incurring heavy losses for several years in a row. Furthermore, my grandfather gave me a 1-month deadline. If I can't turn the losses into profits, he'll close the shop, and my investigation will come to an end. Gloria leaned forward slightly as she looked at Meg with an earnest expression and said, Hence, I thought of making clothes of different sizes out of all of the fabrics that had been stored in the shop for many years. I also thought of the clothes that Mr. Meg designed for Amy and the waitresses in the restaurant. Those clothes are all very beautiful and unique, and I'm sure that all of our customers will love them if we release them. Getting rid of the inventory and developing a more profitable business system at the same time. This is a very good idea, and it's very innovative. Mag looked at Gloria with approval in his eyes. In this era where tailoring was still the norm, Gloria's idea of mass-producing clothes, according to measurements, was very far-sighted. Her background as a wealthy merchant family was on full display at this moment. However, he shook his head at the sight of the smile that gradually blossomed on Gloria's face. But I don't want Amy and Mia to wear the same clothes whenever they walk down the street. But a hint of anxiety appeared on Gloria's face. Chapter 580. Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival in my hometown. As usual, we have to eat mooncakes to symbolize a family reunion. Miss Gloria should be busy tonight, so I won't keep you for the party. You can have this box of mooncakes on the way. Meg turned around and went into the kitchen. After a while, he came out with a box of mooncakes tied up with a string and handed it to Gloria. Thank you. I'll enjoy it. Gloria accepted the mooncake and nodded with a serious expression. All right, go ahead. Meg smiled and nodded. Goodbye, Mr. Meg. Gloria nodded at Meg and walked out of the restaurant. Mooncakes. Tuan tuan yuan yuan. In the horse-drawn carriage, Gloria looked at the box of mooncakes on her lap, and a contemplative look appeared on her face. However, a smile soon appeared on her face, and she murmured to herself, "Then I'll bring it back to eat with them. Mickey should like desserts." Have you heard? Mamie's is holding a Mid-Autumn Festival Gala today. It seems like there will be a lot of people going. What is the Mid-Autumn Festival Gala? I heard from Mr. Mack that it's a good festival to admire the flowers, the moon, and the fragrance of autumn. Autumn is probably a beauty. I'm not interested in flowers and moons, but I like to admire beauties. Let's go and have a look. As night fell, a bustling CC crowd rushed to Amy's to attend the Mid-Autumn Festival Gala, which would start at 8 p.m. sharp. The crowd gathered in the open space outside the restaurant. Although the stage was temporarily built, it was a steel-framed structure that looked very stable. Mabai and Lulu spent an afternoon sponsoring and building it. There were movable wheels at the bottom, and they could be separated from the middle. When not in use, they could be put away. At this moment, there were several large bamboo baskets of mooncakes placed beside the stage. The mooncakes were simply wrapped in oil paper and stacked into a pyramid. For the time being, it was impossible to see what was inside, but the fragrance of the mooncakes was already spreading around the stage, making everyone salivate. It smells so good. Is this the mooncake Mr. Mack was talking about? It smells like a dessert. Looks like I made the right decision to come tonight. Mr. Mack's food never disappoints. But with so many people here today, it'll be good enough if everyone can get a mooncake. When the guests saw the baskets of mooncakes, their eyes lit up. Curiosity about mooncakes was the main motivation for everyone to come here. However, even though there were a lot of mooncakes in the baskets, there were also a lot of people who came today. Many of them came with their families. Children were laughing and playing around the stage, and the atmosphere was quite lively. "Father, can I eat a mooncake first?" In the restaurant, Amy looked at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen, with an expectant look on her face. The small round mooncakes were like tiny moons. Baskets filled with mooncakes were placed on the table beside the stage. There were even more mooncakes than the ones placed beside the stage. Meg turned to Amy with a smile and said, "Of course you can. There are 8 types of mooncakes today, but the mooncakes will only be more delicious if everyone eats them together, so Amy can only eat one for now. You can eat another one during the banquet." There were crispy 5-kernel, pork floss, black sesame, and ham mooncakes, icy red bean paste, osmanthus mooncakes, egg yolks, and rock sugar mooncakes, all of which were arranged in a single row. The freshly baked pastry mooncake was still steaming hot, and a crisp aroma wafted over. Meanwhile, the glittering and translucent ice-skinned mooncake beside it had a hint of coolness to it, making it look like a little ice fairy. The sugar-coated mooncake had a faint yellow hue to it, and one could almost see the filling inside, making one want to take a bite out of it. "I can only eat one." A conflicted expression appeared on Amy's little face as she looked at the plates of mooncakes. All of them looked extremely delicious, and she wanted to pounce on them to take a bite, but she had no choice but to choose one. What a vexing situation. Sally and Yabamiya were busy arranging the mooncakes on the table to dissipate heat, and they couldn't help but smile upon hearing the conversation between the two of them. One adorable mooncake after another was made by Meg, and all of them looked extremely adorable and delicious. The alluring aroma wafting through the air made their stomachs grumble uncontrollably. "Eat one now, and you'll be able to eat all of them later, so there's no need to be so conflicted," Meg reminded with a smile. As expected, a foodie really couldn't make a choice when it came to food. This was even more painful than not being able to eat anything. "In that case, I can only choose this super beautiful ice rabbit mooncake." Amy pointed to an osmanthus ice skin mooncake. The translucent ice skin had a faint golden osmanthus filling wrapped around it, making it appear as if a moon had been embedded into the ice skin. There was a jade rabbit imprinted on the surface of the mooncake, and even though it had been imprinted using an abrasive tool, all of the details were perfectly imprinted on the mooncake, and it looked extremely lifelike. "Wash your hands, then pick one for yourself," Mag chuckled. All of the ice skin mooncakes were made at noon, as they had to be kept in the fridge for a few hours after being made. That way, they would taste better when they were taken out to eat. All right, Amy replied with an elated expression before carrying a small stool into the kitchen to wash her hands. She then carefully reached out with her little hands to pick up an osmanthus ice skin mooncake. The mooncake was cold to the touch, and it felt a little bouncy as she held it in her hands. "You're so cute, little bunny. Your ears are standing up, but I'm going to eat you now." Amy looked at the mooncake in her hands with an elated expression before taking a bite out of it. As soon as she bit into the ice-cold mooncake, the aroma of osmanthus immediately wafted out. The sweet filling was all-pervasive, and it instantly filled her thirsty taste buds. The soft ice skin had a very smooth texture, and it was extremely refreshing. Amy's eyes completely lit up, and her little cheeks puffed up as she chewed quickly like a rabbit. She nodded as she said, It's so delicious. It's as cold as ice cream, but it won't melt in my mouth. Also, the flowers inside are so fragrant, and it's as if I'm eating flowers. It's so sweet and fragrant, and it's super delicious. Father, you're the best." "Eat slowly, don't choke," Meg reminded her, but he couldn't hide the smile on his face. There was nothing happier than being praised by Amy. He turned to Sally and Yabamiya and said with a smile, "Aisha, Mia, you two should eat a mooncake as well. You're going to perform and distribute mooncakes to everyone, so you'll definitely be hungry." "Father, can we really perform Summer is Here today? But we don't have a little fan," Amy asked with a mouthful of mooncake still stuffed into her mouth. She looked up at Meg with a question. Chapter 581. It looks like there's a new restaurant here. Did Alex come to his senses and rent out the place? Or did the owner change hands? A young man with a slight limp on his left leg stopped in the distance, and his brows furrowed as he looked toward Amy's with a perplexed expression. His features were very ordinary with a square face. If it weren't for the scar running down the corner of his eyebrow, he would have been the type of person who would be difficult to spot in a crowd. However, his attire was quite unusual. He wore a dark green silk gown with a belt inlaid with gold and jade buckles. On his feet were high-grade rhinoceros leather boots. This attire couldn't be worn without a rich family background. What was even more eye-catching was the long saber that was hanging from his waist. The saber had a black hilt and black scabbard, and the hilt was wrapped in black cloth, making it appear as mundane as his face. However, the saber hanging from his waist was quite eye-catching. After a brief moment of contemplation, he continued onward. Unfortunately, his left leg was a little limp, and it wasn't apparent when he was standing like a straight poplar tree. However, when he began to walk, his right foot would first step forward, and his left foot would drag along the ground before slowly approaching. Even though he wasn't slower than a normal person walking, it was still a little awkward. However, he paid no heed to the gazes of the bystanders as he continued onward toward Amy's, as if he were an ordinary person who had been attracted to the bustling scene in front of the restaurant. Night had already fallen, but all of the shops in the Aden Square were still brightly lit. There were also street lamps along the streets, which were lit using oil extracted from magic beasts. The lamps were bright and durable, and magic casters would light them up every day. The next morning, special magic casters would come to extinguish them. All of the operating expenses were collected from all of the shops in the Aden Square by the Aden Square Management Office. Within the darkness, a black figure flashed through the dark bushes in the square before stopping on a branch. He looked at the limping young man who was walking toward the restaurant in the corner, and his brows furrowed as he murmured to himself, "Louis always brings back some fun and delicious food for his children wherever he goes, so it's not strange for him to come to the Aden Square. However, he doesn't like crowded environments, so why is he heading toward the most crowded place?" After pondering for a while, Bertley shook his head and continued to hide in the darkness. His eyes continued to follow Louis's figure. With so many people, it was easy to lose sight of the target. Even though he had been monitoring this lame merchant for the past few months, he didn't think that this lame merchant would be capable of plotting to take Alex away from Rodu. Even though he had once been an exceptional knight on the border of the empire, he was now just an ordinary merchant with a wife and children. However, as a member of the cheetahs under the first prince's command, he had to ensure that he was focused on completing the mission. This was the code of conduct of the cheetahs, as well as the basic code of conduct of an imperial soldier, even if they only obeyed the first prince. Captain, we've checked half of the shops in the Aiden Square today, but we still haven't found anything. Should we continue tonight, or go to another location? A thin young man asked in a quiet voice as he looked at Narsen, who was dressed in lavish robes. There was another person standing a few meters away from him. Some of them were dressed like merchants, while others were dressed in casual wear. The thin young man was dressed like a servant, and he didn't seem to have any connection to any of them. It's too conspicuous to check at night. Narsen shook his head as he cast his gaze toward the northwestern corner of the square, where a dense crowd had gathered. A faint smile appeared on his face as he raised a hand and said, "Let's go there." 3-year-old children love to play, and he must be having a hard time right now. Make sure to check all of the bystanders, especially half-elf little girls who are around 3 or 4 years old. Split up and search. Everyone nodded in response, and in the blink of an eye, all of them disappeared into the crowd as they made their way toward Amy's. There really are so many people. Is this the banquet, Mother? This is my first time attending a banquet, Jessica exclaimed as she held onto Rebecca's hand. Her mouth was slightly agape at the sight of the bustling crowd outside Amy's. There are so many people here. This is my first time attending a banquet as well. Rebecca's eyes were also filled with astonishment. She was wearing a vibrant red dress today. The first thing that all of the women in the miners' residential area did after moving into their new houses was to buy new dresses. They had rarely seen such vibrant colors in the past, but now they were all wearing them. Regardless of whether or not they suited their skin tone and figure, vibrant colors were the most important criteria. Some people said that by wearing a vibrant dress, they would be able to sever all ties with their dark and gloomy lives. Rebecca didn't know if that was true, but when she wore this red dress, she felt as if her life was filled with hope, just like the vibrant red color. The women in the miners' residential area were probably thinking the same thing. "Jessica, you're here too. Hello, Auntie." A crisp voice sounded, and Daphne ran over happily. She then turned around and introduced, "This is my grandfather, father, and mother. Hello, Daphne." "Hello, Grandpa, Uncle, and Auntie," Jessica greeted politely with a happy smile on her face. There are so many people today, but it seems like I'm the only one who came. Ignatsu's voice sounded from the side. There was a hint of unhappiness in his voice, and even the green bean sprouts on his head were a little listless. "Don't be sad, Ignatz." Amy appeared at the entrance of the restaurant. She looked at the touched Ignatsu and continued, "Anyway, your father won't come back if you're sad. His seeds are more important than you, right?" Ignatsu's expression immediately fell. He sighed and said, "Yes," in his heart, "those seeds are more important than me. In my mother's heart, playing cards is also more important than me. But, little friend Ignatsu, you're also very important here." Meg strode out of the restaurant and patted Ignatsu's head with a smile before handing the chocolate ice cream in his hand to him. Meg distributed the ice cream in his hand to the children with a smile and said, "You've all had your dinner, right? Here's an ice cream for each of you. We'll eat mooncakes together later." "Thank you, Amy's father." Elated smiles appeared on all of the children's faces. They couldn't forget the delicious ice cream after tasting it once last time. A smile also reappeared on Ignatsu's face. He took a lick of the ice cream, and the sweet taste of chocolate melted in his mouth, making his smile even more vibrant. Meg then greeted Rebecca and Gale. This was the first time that he had met Daphne's father, Gale. He really did resemble Gale very much. Both of them were tall and burly, and the scars on his hands and muscles indicated that he was also an experienced hunter. Gale's wife looked like a housewife. She was a little petite, and her hair was neatly tied up in a bun. Chapter 582. That's right. Father said this is a kimono. It'll look good when you dance in summer. Look, I even have shoes made of wood. You have to clamp them between your thumb and the middle thumb. When you walk, they will make da-da-dee sounds, just like a pony. Amy nodded happily. She was wearing a red and black kimono today, with maple leaves and various other patterns printed on the cheongsam. She also had a pair of brown wooden clogs on her feet, and there was a small pillow behind her waist. She looked very adorable. Also, Big Sister Aisha and Big Sister Mia are both wearing kimonos. We're going to perform a new dance for everyone today, and I also have a pretty little fan. Amy waved the little fan in her hand with a happy smile on her little face. Amy's father is so awesome. Daphne and Jessica looked at Meg with envy and admiration. Yeah, what a beautiful little dress. Did Mr. Meg make it himself? Galen's wife was also looking at Amy's dress with amazement before turning to Meg with curiosity. It's just something for the kids to play with. Meg smiled with an awkward expression. He didn't know how to make clothes, but with the system around, he could brag to the best of his abilities. The gala is about to begin, and there'll be a performance in a while. You can go over to the stage to watch. I also need to go and get ready. Meg glanced at his watch to see that there were still 15 minutes until 8 p.m., and the gala was about to begin. Oh, our little Amy is like a little princess today. She's so pretty, Crassus praised Amy from behind. He leaned on his staff and didn't walk forward. Heh, little Amy is already a princess. Do I need you to say that? But with this little crown, she'll be a little queen. Julian's raspy voice also sounded. He slowly walked forward, and an ice crystal crown appeared in his hand. The countless facets of the crown were extremely dazzling under the light, and the hollow design was extremely elegant, as if it had been carved out of diamonds. Wow, what a beautiful crown! Amy's eyes immediately lit up at the sight of the crown in Julian's hand. The expressions of the other children were similar, and they all looked at the crown that had suddenly appeared in Julian's hand with amazement. Master Crassus, Master Julian, you're here? Meg looked at the two of them with a smile. These two magic casters had strange tempers, but they were very nice to Amy. It was a good thing that they could come on a day like this. Oh, of course, of course. Cece's voice sounded, and she emerged from behind with Lulu. She turned to the children with a smile and said, Wow, all of our little celestial maidens have ice cream to eat. Big Sister wants to eat it too. Can I have a taste too? Big Sister Cece can have mine. Amy was the first to offer her ice cream. Mine is fine too. Jessica nodded. Big Sister Cece can have mine. Daphne also offered her ice cream. Cece's eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. It was quite apparent that all of the children were very fond of her. Ignatzu looked at Cece with a conflicted expression and said, Big Sister Cece, I can let you have a bite of my ice cream, but can you exclude me from the little celestial maiden category? Everyone burst into laughter upon hearing this. Right at this moment, Blower's voice sounded from behind them. What a lively day. How can we miss out on a day like this? Mag looked up to discover Anna, who was wearing a dark blue dress, standing obediently beside Blower. He greeted her with a smile. Hello, little friend Anna. Big Sister Anna. Amy's eyes also lit up. She ran over to Anna and held onto her little hand as she said, Let me introduce you to my friends. Hello, Uncle Meg. Anna greeted Meg in an obedient manner before allowing Amy to introduce her to her new friends. TSK, Mr. Mac, you sure are popular with the children. Blower looked at Meg with a hint of jealousy in his eyes. You can't be envious of such noble qualities. Meg chuckled with a smug expression. There really are a lot of people here today. Our children are all here as well. Luna and Vivian arrived hand in hand. Vivian had changed into a beautiful green dress, and she stood next to Luna like a pair of beautiful sisters. Teacher Luna. All of the children gathered around Luna with elated expressions. Who is this beautiful big sister? Amy turned to Vivian with a curious expression. She's my friend. You can call her Big Sister Vivian, Luna replied with a smile. Blower turned to Vivian with a hint of surprise on his face, but he didn't let his surprise show on his face. He heaved a sigh of relief at the sight of Anna's smile. He had thought that Anna had forgotten how to smile during the past 2 days. As expected, she was the happiest when she was with her children. Meg greeted everyone before returning to the restaurant. He continued to put the cooled mooncakes into baskets before carrying them to the back of the stage. Aside from opening hours and preparing ingredients, he spent almost all of his time making mooncakes. He made 500 of each of the 8 types of mooncakes. His body as a third-tier knight provided him with an extremely high efficiency. Even he couldn't believe that he could make so many mooncakes in a single day. 2 mooncakes should be enough for everyone present. Huh, isn't that Frost Dragon Maiden? Yabamiya exited the restaurant with 2 baskets of mooncakes, only to catch sight of a white figure standing in a corner. It was none other than Elizabeth, and she just so happened to be looking in their direction. A smile appeared on her face as she quickly made her way to the back of the stage. At the same time, she was wondering to herself, could it be that she's also by herself? Where are her family members? Boss said that the Mid-Autumn Festival is a festival of reunion. It's so pitiful for her to be all alone. Is she really her? I've searched through all of the half-dragons in Chaos City, but I couldn't find anyone who matches her age. However, it doesn't seem to be possible that I've found her so easily. No matter how I look at it, she doesn't seem to possess the Golden Dragon bloodline. Elizabeth was also looking at Yabamiya with complex emotions in her heart. Fox had been very busy with the dragon race recently, so he wasn't in Chaos City at the moment. She had already taken care of all of the people who were tailing her, so she had been searching for her half-sister in Chaos City this entire time. Due to Rankster's disappearance for many years, the Frost Dragon race had already begun to discuss the selection of a new chief. As Rankster's only daughter in name, she was one of the candidates, and that was the real reason why Fox had returned to Dragon Island. Chapter 583. Meg stood at the center of the stage and announced loudly, "In my hometown, there's a saying about the moon at the end of autumn. The moon is the roundest and brightest in the entire year, and you can see the same moon anywhere on the Norland continent. As such, people around you will gather together to admire the moon and eat mooncakes together, which symbolizes reunion. Meanwhile, people who are traveling far away will look at the moon and express their yearning for their friends and family." A shimmering golden microphone was erected in front of Meg, and 2 spotlights shone down on him, creating a stage effect. The bright moon hung high in the sky like a white jade plate, and even though there were some clouds in the sky, they didn't block out the bright moonlight in the slightest. The moon at the end of autumn sure is an interesting saying. However, it looks like the moon at this time of the year is indeed the roundest and largest. Luna looked up at the bright moon in the sky before turning to Meg, and she thought to herself, "But where is Mr. Meg's hometown? I've never heard of this festival in the Roth Empire. Reunion? Huh?" Elizabeth murmured to herself as she looked up at Yabamiya, who was adjusting her clothes beside the stage. She was most likely left with only one relative in this world, and that was her half-sister. She knew what kind of person her father was, and if he were still alive, there was no way that he would just stand by and watch what was happening to the Frost Dragon tribe. She had initially thought that she was only trying to fulfill her father's final wish, and that she didn't have any feelings for her half-sister as they were the ones who had stolen her father away from her. However, after hearing Meg's words, she still couldn't help but feel a slight ripple in her heart. Indeed, in this world, she was the only one that she could rely on and trust. Even though it might not be this half-dragon girl who didn't seem to have any dragon aptitude at all, she still felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity as she looked at her. In fact, she even felt that it would be great if she were her. No matter what, at least she was very close to her. Tuan Yuan, I wonder if Mother will miss me? As for Father, Sally stood beside the stage and looked up at the bright moon in the sky. She could see the moon in the wind forest, and it was even brighter than the one in Chaos City. A hint of mockery appeared on her face as she said, "He still sees me as a bargaining chip that can bring great benefits to the family and can be traded as he pleases." She then cast her gaze toward Anna, who was staring blankly into the sky, and was struck by a sense of heartache. She clenched her fists as she thought to herself, She must be missing her grandfather or her parents right now. All of these tragedies were caused by those selfish families in the wind forest, and the same thing is happening all over the Norland continent. Countless elves are unable to be with their loved ones because of this. All of the people below the stage looked at Meg with different expressions on their faces. Some of them were holding onto the hands of those around them, while others were looking up at the moon with dejected expressions. Perhaps there were also people far away who were also looking up at the bright moon in the sky, but no one knew if those people were the ones that they were missing. He's Alex? Lewis looked up at Meg with uncertainty in his eyes. 3 years ago, when he had brought Alex to Chaos City, his body was still in a completely crippled state. All of the meridians in his limbs had been severed, and even though they had been reconnected, he was unable to exert any strength. He couldn't even walk normally, so it was determined that no one in this world could heal him. Furthermore, at the time, he had just undergone a complete plastic surgery, including vocal cords. The gauze on his face hadn't been removed, so no one knew what he looked like after the surgery. Even the magic caster who had performed the surgery didn't know what Alex looked like after his recovery. However, the man standing on the stage right now didn't remind him of Alex at all, regardless of whether it was his appearance, disposition, or voice. Only his figure reminded him of Alex at his peak. However, all of the meridians in Alex's limbs had been severed, and it was determined that he would never be able to recover. As such, he was most likely going to be a cripple for the rest of his life. There was no way that he would be able to walk onto the stage and speak to the thousands of people below the stage with a smile on his face. Alex rarely smiled, and he wasn't good at speaking in front of people. He didn't know how to make mooncakes, so there was no way that he could become the owner of a restaurant, and he didn't have a hometown that celebrated the Mid-Autumn Festival. They had fought side by side for many years, but he had never heard of anyone who he had to think about on a full moon. In his mind, the full moon was the most powerful night for the vampire ancestors, and it was also the time when the evil dragons often came out to wreak havoc. It was also an opportunity for the orcs to launch surprise attacks on the Empire's borders. As such, there was no way that this man was Alex. However, a perplexed look appeared on his face as he looked at Meg on the stage. If he's not Alex, then where did Alex go? If he's only rented out his house, perhaps I can find him through this man. However, if he sold his house, then it'll most likely be very difficult to find him again. Narsen walked through the crowd with a dark expression, sweeping his sharp gaze over all of the children and suspicious men, but to no avail. The other members of the Black Falcons all shook their heads in response, and they also failed to find anyone suspicious in the other directions. He was sure that there was nothing wrong with using the half-elf girl as his target. However, it was not an easy task to find a half-elf girl in Chaos City, which had a population of close to 1 million. He was most likely going to return empty-handed tonight. Welcome to Mamie's Mid-Autumn Festival Party, everyone. Next, please enjoy the dance performed by our adorable Sob 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 girl group. Summer is here, and I hope everyone can pike for them, Meg said with a smile. The lights dimmed, and he quickly walked off the stage with the microphone in his hand. Sob, sob, sob. Good luck. Amy, 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 you're the best. I'm super looking forward to Amy and the two big sisters dance. It's going to be super awesome. The cheerleaders beside the stage were all in high spirits, and they were yelling with joy. Sob, sob, sob? That must be Little Boss. Little Boss is super cute. I want to see her sob, sob, sob. I don't know what Mr. Mac is talking about, but if Little Boss is going to dance, then she's definitely going to be in high spirits. Young Mistress Mia and young Mistress Aisha will be on stage too, right? Little Boss and two super beauties. I can't even imagine what they'll look like. All of the guests below the stage were also getting very excited. Right at this moment, the lights on the stage lit up, and two intersecting beams of light shone down onto the center of the stage. Amy was wearing a kimono and wooden clogs, and she was holding an open fan in her hand. Sally and Yabamiya were also wearing kimonos, and they stood on either side of her with their fans in their hands, posing elegantly as they stood on either side of her. She is. Lewis's eyes immediately widened. Chapter 584. The impassioned drumbeat opened the prelude to the dance music, followed by a female voice that sounded like the sound of nature. The three people standing in the center of the stage also began to dance along with the music. Their folding fans fluttered, and their bright-colored kimonos also fluttered along with the dance, like three elegant butterflies. Boldness is no match for the revolution. Lei luo 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 luo, lei luo 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 luo, lei luo 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 luo, lei luo 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 luo, lei luo 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 luo, lei luo 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 luo, lei 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 luo luo. Piano, electric guitar, bass. The sound of Sinbanzai's music echoed throughout the Aiden Square, and the entire stage lit up. Although they couldn't understand the lyrics, everyone was still ignited by the passionate music and cheerful dance, screaming and cheering. What made them even more curious was the seemingly messy, yet inexplicable harmony of the instruments, which even produced an indescribably stirring sound. Came from where exactly? Could it be that Mr. Mac was hiding a band under the stage? Wow, Amy is amazing. I love you. Daphne looked up at Amy with adoration in her eyes as she sat on Guy's neck. It's another brand new dance song. Even though I don't understand the music at all, Mr. Mag is really awesome. If he's also the one who choreographed the dance, then what doesn't he know? Luna looked at the three people on the stage who were dancing elegantly with neat steps. She looked curiously at Meg and thought to herself, he was always able to surprise people. Just when you thought you could see through him, he would go deeper into the fog, making you completely unable to figure out what kind of person he was and what kind of secrets he was hiding. The more curious he was, the more he wanted to understand. Step by step, he stepped into Zhang Xian's trap. When she had left Rodu, her mother had told her that she shouldn't be overly curious about a man as that would make her lose her rationality. She had always kept that advice in mind, and she had always done her best. However, she was unable to control her curiosity now. This man wasn't like other men who pretended to be unfathomable. His endless abilities made her want to understand him wholeheartedly, even if it meant falling into his trap. It's so exciting. Even I want to jump onto the stage and dance, Vivian exclaimed as she stood beside Luna, looking as if she were about to rush onto the stage and dance with Zhang Xian. That's right. She's most likely that little girl from all those years ago. She's so pretty, and she's so good at dancing. Alex sure is lucky. After a brief moment of surprise, a gratified smile appeared on Lewis's face as he looked at Amy, who was fluttering gracefully on the stage like an adorable butterfly. He then turned to look at Mag, who was standing beside the stage. His gaze had been focused on Amy this entire time, and there was a wide smile on his face as well as a doting look in his eyes. It's been 3 years since we last met, and he's a completely different person. He can't even recognize me standing in front of him. Who else in this world can recognize that he's Alex? Lewis sighed with emotion as he looked at Meg, then at the baskets of mooncakes on the stage, and a skeptical look appeared on his face as he thought to himself, but is Alex's food really edible? He can even roast sweet potatoes into charcoal. The 8 members of the Black Falcons had already gathered in a secluded corner, and they were all looking at Amy with excitement in their eyes. Team leader, what do we do now? The thin servant asked in a quiet voice as he looked at Narsen. Her age matches, and she's also a half-elf. However, we can't be sure that she's the target we're looking for yet. Let's find out who she is first before taking action. Remember, no matter what, we have to act in secret and only strike after the banquet is over, Narsen said in a low voice. Everyone nodded in response, and no one dared to do anything rash. Hey, who's that little girl dancing over there? She's dancing so adorably. Narsen looked around before catching sight of a tall and burly young man, and he made his way over to him with a smile. She's new here? You don't even know her? She's the owner of Mamie's. The young man took a disdainful glance at Narsen before continuing to dance to the music. Owner? Is her father the owner of this restaurant? Narsen took a deep breath to calm himself down before continuing to ask. Of course she's Mr. Mac's daughter. Your questions are so boring. the young man said with a roll of his eyes. Narsen slowly stowed away the dagger in his sleeve and repressed the urge to stab the young man to death. He forced a smile onto his face as he asked, "Is the owner of this restaurant by himself? Is he the one who was speaking on stage just then? Where's her mother?" "Hey, you're not trying to steal owner, are you?" A wary look immediately appeared on the young man's face as he turned to appraise Narsen with a skeptical expression. "Hee, how is that possible? I was just a little curious." Narsen chuckled dryly with a stiff expression as he tightened his grip around his dagger. The other members of the Black Falcons were also slowly making their way toward Tangwaline. There's no need to be embarrassed. Half of the people here are thinking the same thing. Owner is just too adorable. She's so adorable. The young man chuckled before turning to Narsen with a disdainful expression as he shook his head and said, "You might not even be able to defeat Owner, so you should give up on that thought." Narsen heaved a sigh of relief as he stowed away his dagger. All of the other members of the Black Falcons also retreated. However, Narsen's expression was still rather strained. What the hell was this about? Even Owner might not be able to defeat Owner? That little brat didn't seem to be more than 3 or 4 years old, while he was a genuine 4th-tier assassin. If it weren't for the fact that he was on a mission, he would definitely give this little brat a taste of his own medicine. He's too adorable. I was just asking. Even though Narsen really wanted to beat someone up, he still forced a smile onto his face. He stared at Meg, who was standing beside the stage, and tried to find some resemblance of Alex in him. However, regardless of whether it was his nimble limbs or his gentle disposition, he couldn't find any similarities between him and Alex. All of the information emphasized one thing. Alex was crippled, and there was no way he could ever recover. As such, there was no way that he could walk or stand normally, and there was no way that he could step onto the stage as easily as this man before him and give a speech to so many people with a smile on his face. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.